Chapter 2166. Don't bother looking for it. I'll go next door and borrow a drying pole for you, Luna said with a smile. Hee hee, Luna is the best. Vivian immediately smiled and hugged Luna's arm. Don't talk nonsense. Tell me, why are you here in this outfit? Luna looked at her and asked, I'm here to say goodbye to you. Goodbye? Yes, I've decided. I'm going to the front line of the far north to fight the undead army. Vivian nodded confidently. Are you serious? Luna stared at Vivian for a while. Of course. Vivian raised her chin and looked into the distance. I'm a lonely swordswoman. I'm destined to walk on the edge of a blade. You don't have to persuade me. You can't persuade me. You're a knight who fell when climbing a wall. You still want to go to the front line? That was an accident. An accident. What about the swordsman who threw away his sword? That was also an accident. You snuck out of your house, right? How did you know? I saw your bag hanging on the wall. I threw it away. This armor isn't warm, is it? No. Vivian changed into Luna's outfit and sat on the bed with the blanket wrapped around her. She looked at Luna, who was sitting at the table and writing. Luna put down her pen and folded the letter. She walked to the bed and asked, When do you plan to go home? I'm not going home. I'm on the front line. Vivian shook her head. Luna looked into her eyes and said seriously, Do you know how many knights have to sacrifice their lives to save a noble young lady who doesn't have the ability to protect herself on the battlefield? I can protect myself. Vivian averted her gaze, her confidence waning. Hope school is going to start soon. You're a new teacher and have a lot of work to do. Your battlefield is on the podium. How to let the students listen obediently and how to let them learn knowledge is what you should be doing. Me? Vivian raised her head and looked into Luna's eyes. She was a little discouraged, but she still said unwillingly, But if we lose the war, it will be difficult for the children to even survive, let alone learn. I want to do something for this war. I heard that in the past 2 days, they have been distributing cotton cloth and cotton to sew cotton-padded clothes for the soldiers. I'm going to go out to send a letter and get some cotton cloth and cotton to sew cotton-padded clothes for the soldiers. Do you want to come with me? Luna put away the letter and smiled. Sure. Vivian nodded and jumped up from the bed. We can also grab a hot pot later. At the border between the Twilight Forest and the Roth Empire, a huge orc army was passing through quickly. The tall walls were torn down, and the deep trenches were filled in. The knights of the Roth Empire stood on both sides to welcome their former enemies into the empire's borders. A 200,000-strong orc army crossing the border was something that had never happened in the Roth Empire's 100-year history. However, the orc army crossing the border this time was not for an invasion. They were going to the north to fight alongside the Roth Empire's warriors to resist the invasion of the undead army. The elite main force of the Northwestern Army had already set off for the north a few days ago. The Roth Empire would be in charge of the orc army's logistics from the moment they entered the Roth Empire's borders. However, what surprised the soldiers who stayed behind was that almost all of these orc warriors were carrying a bulging bag. They could see a hoof or a tail sticking out from the bag often. They even saw an orc who was over 5 meters tall using a metal rod to carry 2 bison that weighed more than 500 kilograms. Yes, this 200,000-strong orc army had brought their own rations with them on the journey. Furthermore, all the wild beasts and magic beasts that could be captured within a radius of tens of miles would become their food. This made the soldiers of the Empire who were preparing to feed this huge army along the way heave a sigh of relief and reduce a lot of pressure. Connie sat on a unicorn and said to Rex, I have already communicated with Andre. When we reach Chaos City, a granary will be open for us. We will have to carry the rations to the front line ourselves. When the orcs go to war, they have always carried their own rations to the battlefield. There is no such thing as a logistics team. That is not a problem. Rex nodded. Connie nodded. That was indeed an orc's tradition. Rex looked at the long line of soldiers and said in a low voice, We have to discipline the troops well. Many of our people still have hatred in their hearts, but we need everyone to be united in this situation. Connie nodded and said, I will gather all the chiefs for a meeting tonight and ask them to discipline the warriors in their tribes. Above the boundless sea realm, Thousands of merfolk warriors walked on the waves. As the high priest of Lantis, Dexter was also the leader of this expedition. Gina rode on a big dolphin and followed Dexter around. "Master, is it especially cold in the north?" Gina asked. "Yes. In the extreme north ice plains, water will turn into ice if you splash it on it. The weather is extremely cold." Dexter nodded. "Phew, that's terrible." Gina shivered. The Boundless Sea realm was warm all year round, and there was no trace of ice and snow, even in winter. After a while, Gina asked Dexter, "However, do we really not need to tell Mr. Meg about the anomaly that happened at the bottom of the sea?" Dexter thought for a while and nodded. "We will tell him when we reach the extreme north ice plains. We've yet to find out what exactly caused the anomaly." Gina nodded. She still felt a little uneasy when she recalled the scene of the sky pillar trembling violently yesterday. This war is more important than anything else. We cannot let Mr. Meg be distracted by these trivial matters. Dexter seemed to have seen through Gina's thoughts. He shook his head with a smile and said, "Moreover, His Majesty is guarding the tribe. Nothing will happen." "I understand." Gina nodded with a smile. Dexter retracted his gaze and lowered his head to look at the surface of the sea. His expression was also solemn. The anomaly yesterday was indeed a little unusual. There seemed to be something trying to escape from under Lantis, causing the sky pillar to tremble continuously. This situation lasted for the entire night and only stopped this morning. The spell formation masters of Lantis had already sped up the ceiling around the sky pillar. Although they were not sure what was under the sky pillar, it was still very important. The shadow of the devil had yet to dissipate, and His Majesty was confirming if there was an ancient seal around the sky pillar, as well as if there was a devil sealed under Lantis. Before that, he planned to report this matter to Mr. Meg when he met him personally. There was no situation more urgent than a million-strong undead army in the north. Chapter 2167. Why aren't Mr. Hades and the rest back yet? AI Faye stood at the door and looked at the closed Saipan Tavern with a worried expression. The panic of the war had been spreading in Rodu for the past few days. Regardless of whether it was the army confiscating the peach trees and glutinous rice, or the various rumors circulating in the streets, all of them indicated that something big was about to happen. The situation was so chaotic, and Mr. Hades and his family were nowhere to be found. This made AI Faye a little worried. "Master and the rest aren't back yet." Mara walked out from behind AI Faye and looked at the tavern opposite. Then, she craned her neck to look in another direction. "It's open. If you want to watch the show for free, go ahead." AI Faye knew what she was looking at and smiled. "That's not a show. That's an opera." Mara emphasized. "Isn't an opera just a show?" "It's not the same. An opera is a performance with singing, but show doesn't have singing." Mara shook her head and smiled as she held AI Faye's arm. "Miss, why don't you come with me? Miss Black Cat is so beautiful. Also, they just opened yesterday, and the tickets are half price." "No." AI Faye refused. She was really not interested in these things. If she had to sit there for a few hours without moving, it would be worse than killing her. "Oh, right, you said Mr. Hades let them stay in that building. Did he say anything else to you? Like rent or something?" AI Faye asked Mara. The opera troupe came quickly, and they were even faster. In just 2 or 3 days, they had already cleaned up the place, both inside and outside. Yesterday, they even put up a sign and opened for a trial operation. She went to take a look yesterday and found that most of the items were old items left behind by the circus. After cleaning up, the stage was repainted, and it looked quite presentable. She was not interested, but Mara was crazy about it. These 2 days, she would go to the opera theater whenever she was free, and she would promote it to everyone she met. The tickets were not expensive, only 50 copper coins each. Children were half price, and there was a half-price promotion for the first few days. Mr. Hades had hundreds of shops, and this was the first one that was rented out. Therefore, many neighbors went to join in the fun. They all wanted to see what this opera house was and why Mr. Hades looked at it in a different light. After watching the performance, the neighbors were full of praises. For the past 2 days, the neighbors had been talking about Miss Black Cat's story. When it came to emotional parts, the aunties would even shed silent tears. They were deeply engrossed in the drama. No, Master just asked me to give the key and a letter to Leader Vicky. I've read the letter. Master lent the building to them for the performance and didn't ask for rent. Mara shook her head. He didn't ask for rent? AI Faye was a little surprised. The Opera House's shop was huge and could be compared to several ordinary shops. Although the layout was a little strange, with the rising housing prices and rental prices on Romo Street, a casual change to the layout would cost hundreds of thousands of copper coins a year. But Mr. Hades actually gave the shop to the opera troupe for free. Could it be that Mr. Hades and Miss Vicky are friends? Or was there another reason? Eiffel wondered. Mara let go of Effie's hand and said, "Miss, then I'll go by myself. I have an appointment with the leader to practice the play. She said she can arrange the role of a maid for me." "You want to be an actress?" AI Faye looked at Mara. I'm just casually playing a guest role." Mara blushed. Come back early tonight to cook." AI Faye waved her hand. "Okay." A smile appeared on Mara's face as she skipped towards the opera house. AI Faye looked at Mara's back and smiled helplessly. This girl wants to learn everything. Mara ran into the opera house. She had become familiar with everyone in the opera house these past few days. She greeted the performers familiarly and then obediently sat on a seat on the side, holding her chin as she watched the performers rehearse. The performers of the Black Cat Song Troupe were also used to this little girl coming to watch the performance every day. Most of them had also done the same in the beginning and had become one of them. They could see from Mara's eyes that she liked it and wanted to become an opera singer. This was very important. Moreover, the leader liked this little girl very much, so they naturally wouldn't say anything. "Mara, you're here." Vicky walked out from behind the stage and said to Mara, who was sitting in the audience, "Yes, I'm here to watch everyone rehearse." Mara quickly stood up and nodded. "Do you really want to learn opera?" Vicky walked forward and looked into Mara's eyes. Although the leader wasn't tall, Mara felt pressured by her stare. After thinking seriously for a while, she nodded. "Yes, I want to learn. Learning opera is very difficult. Without 3 to 5 years, you won't be able to become a good opera singer." Vicky said calmly. "They've been learning for almost 2 years, but they're only at the beginner level. There's still a long way to go." "They're only at the beginner level?" Mara was shocked. She felt that these big brothers and sisters sang very well, but in the leader's eyes, they were only at the beginner level. When she thought of her voice that sounded like a rooster's crowing when she opened her mouth, she immediately wanted to retreat. "Little Mara, don't be afraid. Uncle used to sell sugar water on the streets." An uncle with a shiny head looked at Mara and laughed. "Perseverance is victory. Come on, Ollie." Mara was successfully motivated by the uncle's encouragement, and her gaze became firm. She looked at Vicky and said, "I can do it." Vicky nodded and said, "If you join the opera troupe, then you'll have to eat and live in the opera troupe. I'll personally teach you how to become an opera singer." Mara was shocked and quickly shook her head. "No, I want to learn opera, but I can't join the opera troupe. I still have a young lady to take care of at home." Vicky frowned and looked at Mara with a sharp gaze. "So, you want to be a free prostitute?" Mara felt that the leader's aura suddenly became very scary, and she became infinitely small. But she really couldn't just sell herself like this, because she belonged to the young lady, and even she didn't have the right to sell herself. Also, she said that she would learn to cook from her master. If she ate and lived in the opera troupe and had to rehearse every day, how would she have time to learn to cook? Can I come to learn every afternoon?" Mara shrank her neck and asked tentatively. She could only be an amateur opera singer. Even if she was just a walk-on, Mara wanted to experience the feeling of being on stage, the feeling of being the center of attention. Just thinking about it was very shameful, but also very exciting. Vicky frowned and looked at Mara. After a moment of silence, she said, "Come with me." Chapter 2168. Mara nervously followed Vicky backstage. The opera singers on the stage clenched their fists and gave her silent encouragement and blessings. "Is the leader going to lock me up and beat me up?" "I'm so obedient. I don't think so." Mara let her imagination run wild as she followed Vicky into a private room. Click! Vicky closed the door and locked it. Mara took half a step back and leaned against the wall. She looked at Vicky nervously. Leader Vicky gave her a strange feeling. Sometimes she was gentle and kind, like a caring little sister who would patiently teach her how to pronounce and sing. But sometimes she was like a strict teacher who would pull out a thick and long pointer to teach her a lesson at any time. Mara was a little scared, but Leader Vicky's opera singing was too good. It was like the sound of nature, and she acted like the real Miss Black Cat. Mara admired her immensely. So now that Vicky was staring at her, she was a little scared, but also a little expectant. Would the leader agree to her request? Do you know what's going on outside? Why has the streets been so noisy these 2 days? Vicky asked. Mara was stunned for a moment. She didn't expect the leader to suddenly ask a completely unrelated question. She thought about it and felt that the leader must be testing her to see if her observation of life was meticulous. I heard that there's going to be a war. Demons are coming to eat us, especially those little fatties who like to eat. So His Majesty the King ordered everyone to chop down the peach trees and hand them in. He said that he's going to the north to fight the demons. Mara said seriously. This was what Miss Black Cat told her in the morning. Because of this, she even ate a bowl of rice for breakfast. Vicky stared at Mara for a while and still felt that her words were illogical. Where can I get the latest news around here? Vicky asked. Of course, it's the Romo Street Information Center. Mara blurted out. There's such a place? Vicky frowned in surprise. Yes, it's right under the big trees on Romo Street. Every day after dinner, a large number of uncles and aunties would gather together to exchange the latest news they heard today. Then, they would package it up and make it into a rumor. Mara nodded her little head. Vicky narrowed her eyes. She wasn't sure if this guy was just teasing her. Mara blinked, a little nervous, wondering if she had said something wrong. Go out. Today, we'll learn how to stretch our voices from Abaka. Vicky put her hand to her forehead and gestured for Mara to leave. Okay. Mara nodded happily and opened the door. It seemed that the leader had agreed to let her stay. Looks like I have to go out and take a look myself. Vicky picked up a jacket from the clothes rack and put it on. She put on a hat and a few silver coins before she left the house. Leader, are you going out? Uncle Abaka, who was teaching Mara how to stretch her voice, looked at Vicky, who was wearing a jacket, and asked, Yes, I'm going out. The performance at noon is canceled. I'll give you half a day off. Vicky said and went out without looking back. The actors of the opera troupe who were rehearsing looked at each other. It was only the second day of the opening. How could the leader let them rest? These 2 days were the most glorious days of their career. The number of guests who came to watch the performance last night exceeded 20. Although most of them were neighbors, the 500 copper coins that they earned from the entrance ticket was very good. Although there were only 8 guests who came to watch the performance this morning, it was expected that there wouldn't be many people. It should be better at noon and at night. The leader was the soul of the whole situation. Without her, Miss Black Cat couldn't continue the performance. Okay, let's continue with the rehearsal. We'll give the audience a good opera tonight. Abaka clapped his hands and let everyone continue with the rehearsal. Vicky went out and went to the street under the trees. The uncles and aunties who had just finished lunch had gathered, and the moment they opened their mouths, they were spreading exaggerated and shocking rumors. Vicky lowered the brim of her hat and listened for a long time. This was indeed a place where rumors were spread. In less than 10 minutes, she had already heard several pieces of ordinary news, which were turned into shocking rumors after a round of discussion. However, the topics of the uncles and aunties did not go beyond the 3 streets nearby. Vicky stood up silently, stood at the corner of the street for a while, and hailed a carriage. Go to the nearest information station. Vicky said, Okay. The coachman agreed. 10 minutes later, Vicky got out of the carriage. Looking at the small information station in front of her, she paid the fare and walked into the station. Another 10 minutes later, Vicky walked out of the station with a paper bag in her hand. She hailed another carriage and went back to the opera house. Vicky locked herself in her room and read the news about the demons and the war in the north carefully. Demons and an undead army of 1 million. Could they be the ancient invaders recorded in the ancient books? But weren't they sealed away? Vicky frowned and tapped her delicate finger lightly on the information. This was a piece of news that she had bought for 5 silver coins, and the content was very limited. However, the commotion in Rodu in the past few days was indeed related to the demons. It was said that all the races had formed an alliance to go up north to fight against the demons and the undead army. In the past 2 days, the guards had been collecting peach trees and glutinous rice from door to send them to the front line. Anyone who dared to hide them would be punished for treason. What should I do? If that demon is really an invader that was sealed away in the ancient times, should I report it to Grandpa? Vicky held her chin and was a little conflicted. She had finally escaped after much difficulty and hadn't even had the time to do anything. Why did she have to run into those blind demons? Damn it! Vicky clenched her fists. She didn't want to care about those invaders, but if that big blockhead destroyed the entire Norland continent, who would want to watch her opera? She had started to make a vow that she would create the most successful opera troupe. Now that she had finally found an opera house that she could stay in and a group of adorable audience members, this kind of thing suddenly happened. No, I have to go and take a look myself. I can't expose my location so easily. Otherwise, Grandpa will definitely send people to capture me. Vicky got up and walked to the corner of the wall. She knocked on the wall twice softly. Crack! A crisp mechanical sound rang out, and a small door popped out from the flat wall, revealing a small cabinet. There were only 2 things in the cupboard, a shiny, high-tech silver watch and a silver metal stick. Vicky took out the silver watch and put on her wrist. The strap automatically contracted to a suitable degree of tightness. The dial lit up, and a virtual screen popped up. In the middle of the screen was a spaceship. The spaceship's parameters and status are normal. A line of small words quickly floated past. Vicky pulled down her sleeve to cover the watch. Then, she picked up the remaining silver metal stick and put it in her small bag. She slammed the door on the wall shut. Cancel the performance tonight, too. Let's take a break today, Vicky said, and went out again. Chapter 2169. The horse-drawn carriage stopped outside the city. Vicky paid the coachman the fare and walked away under the coachman's puzzled gaze. This young lady is too daring to leave the city alone. The coachman shook his head and turned the carriage back to the city. Vicky went over a hill and looked around to make sure there was no one around. She took out her watch again and tapped on the virtual screen a few times. The ground shook slightly, and the pile of dried leaves in the valley far away fell. A silver spaceship spewed out blue flames and rose slowly, hovering in front of Vicky. Vicky stepped on the spiral ladder and entered the cockpit. She took out the silver rod from her bag and inserted it into the hole in the middle of the steering wheel. Identity verification successful. Highest authority activated. A mechanical notification sounded. Go here. Vicky opened the map and marked a spot. Position confirmed. Autopilot activated. The mechanical voice sounded again. The spaceship started and disappeared outside Rodu. A spaceship floated above the boundless sea realm. She stared at the data that kept coming back from the virtual screen with a grave expression. The strange movement under Lantis caught her attention. She had been observing here for a day. According to the ancient records, the sinking of Lantis back then was related to Cthulhu's old lair, Arila City. However, Arila City had sunk for countless years and was directly pulled into the underground world. It should have been completely isolated from the Norland continent. Why would there be a sudden movement? She had already reported the situation to the underground city, but she was still waiting for a reply. Right at this moment, her gaze suddenly landed on the virtual screen at the side. There was a bright red that was moving quickly. It's the signal from the Black Cat. She's eyes lit up, and she immediately opened the map to check. Miss Vicky from the Roosevelt family ran away from home 3 years ago, and her whereabouts were unknown. She had come to the Norland continent to carry out an observation mission. Before she set off, the Roosevelt family had asked her to help find Miss Vicky on the Norland continent and to give her the signal locator of the Black Cat spaceship that she was piloting. However, This was the first time she detected the black cat signal in the past few months. She used to think that Vicky was not on the Norland continent, but now it seemed that she might have not activated the black cat in the past few months. Looking at this route, could she be going to the far north ice field? Looking at the fast-moving spaceship, Vicky was shocked. She hesitated for a while, but still activated the spaceship. The huge spaceship rose from the sea and then turned into a stream of light that flew toward the North Pole. Vicky had already changed into a black combat suit. She sat in front of the control panel with a serious expression, looking at the approaching destination. Her objective for this trip was very simple. She was going to take care of that troublesome ancient invader before returning to Rodu. If she could make it in time, perhaps the performance at night wouldn't have to be canceled, and the Black Cat Opera Troupe will be able to earn a ticket price of 1,000 copper coins. I once read in an ancient book that the ancient invaders were very powerful and couldn't be killed. Therefore, our ancestors could only seal them all over the Norland continent. Can we kill them? Vicky murmured to herself worriedly. You said it was from ancient times. The ancients back then definitely did not have as advanced technology as they do now. Let's go up and shoot it with the electromagnetic cannon. Then the entire ship will focus fire on it and send it to the sky. It's that simple and crude. Vicky answered her own question. But don't be so wishy-washy. I'll control the spaceship later. I'll show you what absolute firepower is. Vicky smiled, and her eyes were full of excitement. What's that? A mountain range appeared on the screen. It was like a city wall on the snowfield. The camera zoomed in. Many humans were busy repairing the city wall and setting up spell formations on the mountain range. You want to stop the ancient invaders and the million-strong undead army with this wall. Vicky frowned. She did not see the so-called allied army. She did not even know if they really existed. Forget it. Let's go in and take a look. Vicky deactivated the autopilot mode. She slowly pushed the accelerator lever, and the spaceship suddenly sped up. It flew over the Gus Mountain range in an instant. Meg, who was observing the terrain on the mountain, seemed to have sensed something. He looked up at the sky. Although he did not see any traces of the spaceship, he felt something flying across the sky in that instant. With such speed and stealth, it had to be she. But why would she enter the ice field at this time? Was she planning to eliminate some of the undead army's forces for the allied army before the war? Meg and she were now semi-allies. They had the same goal and shared the same information on dealing with Cthulhu. However, this was all based on the premise that she took the initiative to share. Meg could not ask her for more information. For example, he did not know where she was these few days, what she was doing, and why she suddenly appeared on the ice field and went deep into the ice field. Of course, with her battleship's performance, as long as she did not get too close to Cthulhu, it would not be a problem for her to wander around the ice field. At this thought, Meg looked at his old buddy who was chewing on a bone at the side. Meg could not help but feel envious. Ozzy was naturally a first-class mount. On the Norland continent, there should not be a mount that could fly faster than him, including giant dragons. As a 10th-tier magic beast, Ozzy's attack power was actually not strong due to its extreme speed. It was only at the level of spitting thunderballs. Meg was rather curious about She's purpose in entering the ice field. However, the ice field was not his home after all. It was not good to enter and leave casually. He still had to consider Cthulhu's feelings. If he was angered and summoned a million undead army to the south, then the allied army would have to rush home and fight on their own. Being the head of the house was difficult. Meg walked around the mountain and took out a pen and paper to write and draw. According to the terrain, he had basically determined the style and location of the turrets. Next, he should make a trip back to Chaos City and bring the first batch of cannons to the front line. I still have to discuss with Jonas about the main cannon. I have to set up a protective spell formation for it. Meg kept the pen and paper and walked down the mountain. Right at this moment, he suddenly looked up and narrowed his eyes. Why is there another one? If the previous spaceship was She's, then whose was this one? Could it be that the Ancient One's reinforcements had arrived? In that case, he had to go and watch the show. Ozzy. Meg whistled. Ozzy turned its head and shook off the bone that it had been chewing on for a long time before flapping its wings and flying. This direction. Fly at full speed. Meg raised his hand and pointed in a direction as he ordered. Howl! Ozzy raised its head and howled. The runes on its wings flowed as it turned into a purple lightning bolt and plunged into the ice field, disappearing into the horizon. Chapter 2170. They had pretty well. I finally found them. Vicky smiled as she looked at the tens of thousands of ancient corpses hidden in the canyon below. This is a battlefield from ancient times. All the races joined forces to fight the invaders here. They suffered heavy casualties and eventually sealed the invaders. I didn't expect their corpses to be used by the invaders to invade the Norland continent that they used to protect, another voice said. They are no longer the heroes that protected the Norland continent in the past. They are puppets controlled by the devil. If they knew about this, they would want us to destroy them. Vicky let the spaceship hover, opened the weapon compartment, and aimed at the ancient corpses in the canyon. But where's their controller? Vicky stared at the screen. The results of the radar scan were only small red dots in the canyon. There were no stronger life forms. The ancient invaders were feared by our ancestors. We had better be careful. Let's see how long they can hide. Vicky pressed the red button beside her hand. The 4 cannonballs that had been locked on were fired and flew towards the canyon below. They split open at a height of several hundred meters above the canyon and turned into hundreds of small bombs that fell into the canyon. Boom, boom, boom. Accompanied by a loud explosion, flames burst, and a mushroom cloud rose slowly. The icebergs on both sides of the canyon collapsed in the explosion and almost filled up the entire canyon. Roar. Interesting. Vicky was a little excited. She stared at the red dots that had disappeared on the screen and aimed at the place where the red dots were densely concentrated. The smoke and water vapor gradually dissipated, and the skeletons struggled to climb out from under the ice. After being attacked, the red light in their eyes became brighter. They were like beams of light looking for targets and started to leave the canyon. The ancient corpses that had the ability to fly started to take off. Dozens of different ancient corpses flew into the sky and towards the battleship in the sky. Come on, you disgusting creatures. Vicky looked at the ancient corpses that were approaching quickly. There were even a few zombie dragons among them. She pressed the button to fire the cannonballs and pulled the handle to switch to the battleship's heavy machine gun. She aimed at the ancient corpses below and started a one-sided massacre. Da-da-da. With a series of smooth gunshots, the zombie dragon's head was blown off, and half of its head was blown off. The flying magical bee skeleton was blown apart. It disintegrated in midair. Vicky was in an invincible position against the undead army of 50,000. The bombs that were dropped earlier swept through the canyon once again, turning over 10,000 skeletons into dust. When we get back, you can write an opera about Miss Black Cat wiping out the Valley of the Dead. Vicky smiled as she looked at the fleeing skeletons. The undead army that was feared by all the races of the Norland continent was only SOSO. Come to think of it, the various races of the Norland continent were too weak. Their technology was also lacking. Not only did they not have battleships, they did not even have cannons. In this world, there were no skeletons that couldn't be taken care of by a cannon. If there is, then let's have another shot. The Black Cat battleship belonged to Vicky's grandfather. Vicky grew up on spaceships and became the youngest captain of the Ancients at the age of 8. Originally, she could only officially own this battleship when she was 18 and joined the Ancient One's defense army. But when she ran away from home 2 years ago, she secretly took the ship out. This was a quasi-battleship class spaceship. However, Vicky had modified it herself. Whether it was the power system or the weapon system, it was already at the level of a battleship. Also, there was an ample amount of ammunition. When she left home, she emptied half of the fleet's ammunition storage. But what is this button for? Vicky played with it for a while before her gaze landed on an eye-catching white button beside the screen. Self-destruct button. It's best not to press it unless it's an emergency. Another gentle voice answered. Don't worry. I won't kill myself for fun, even if I'm fine. Vicky pressed down on the control stick and let the spaceship dive down. At the same time, She aimed the machine gun at the fleeing skeletons and started shooting. Those who were too weak were naturally not in her target range. Only those skeletons with even more dazzling red dots were qualified to take a bullet from her. The ice spears that the skeletons threw couldn't even leave any obvious marks on the surface of the spaceship. This was a one-sided massacre. That guy, where is it hiding? Do you know what it looks like? Vicky scanned the surroundings, including the ice surface. What was strange was that after so long, the legendary ancient invader still hadn't appeared. Most of the ancient invaders are indescribable creatures. They have terrifying appearances. Some have the head of an octopus, and their gelatinous bodies can transform into any shape they wish. They even have giant bat wings on their backs, and some are illusory. Beep, beep. Unknown object approaching rapidly. Danger! The spaceship suddenly issued a warning and quickly entered automatic evasive mode. As it fired the stun grenades, it accelerated and left. Bang! However, a dull sound of a collision was heard from above the spaceship. The spaceship was knocked down by the impact. Many warning signs appeared on the dial. Hull damaged. Air pressure dropping rapidly. Engine number 4 has stopped. Backup engine failed to start. Vicky hit her head on the control stick during the collision, and there was a red swelling in the middle of her head. Ugh, it hurts. Vicky held her forehead, and she was a little confused. Quickly pull the spaceship to the left. It's coming again. Another voice said anxiously. What? Vicky tried to grab the control stick. However, before she could react, the spaceship was hit violently again. Rip! An ear-piercing, tearing sound was heard from above, and a large part of the top of the spaceship was torn off. The spaceship lost control and fell to the ground. 1500 m, 1200 m, 800 m. The alarm was loud, and the spaceship was getting lower and lower. The skeletons that were scattered began to gather in the area where the spaceship was falling. The corpses that were baring their fangs and brandishing their claws seemed to be ready to enjoy a feast. Vicky was a little flustered, and she didn't know what to do. Let me do it. A gentle and helpless voice was heard. The fluster in Vicky's eyes disappeared, and it was as if she was a different person. She quickly pressed a few buttons, and 3 of the engines that had stopped, almost all of them were restarted. She gripped the control stick with both hands and gritted her teeth as she pulled it up. Right before the spacecraft hit the ground, it swayed as it climbed up once again, sticking to the surface of the ice. The ancient corpses that jumped up even hung on the front of the spaceship and slapped the surface of the spaceship crazily. At this moment, Vicky finally saw the existence that was attacking them. A majestic frost dragon was suspended in midair, and it stared at them with its scarlet eyes. No pop-up windows. Chapter 2171. The gigantic frost dragon had a wingspan of more than 200 meters, and its claws were as sharp as swords. Its crystal-clear wings were like condensed frost, and its powerful aura made Vicky feel how small she was. It was the fear that came from the depths of her soul when the dragon looked down on her like an ant. Weren't there corpses everywhere? Why is there such a powerful dragon here? Vicky's voice was trembling slightly. It was this big guy that had attacked the fighter jet earlier. The Ancient One's best fighter jet had not been able to dodge automatically. Although the spaceship was temporarily under control, many of its engines had stopped, and the exterior of the cabin was severely damaged. It was impossible to escape at full speed. Fortunately, the weapon system was still operating normally. Vicky pulled out the weapon system without hesitation and aimed the electromagnetic cannon at the dragon. At the same time, 4 homing missiles were fired, flying toward the frost dragon in a crisscross pattern. Boom! The electromagnetic cannon was successfully charged, and the shells flew out of the huge cannon barrel. The spaceship flew backward, trying to get away from the dragon. 5 cannonballs were enough to reduce everything in an area to nothingness. Even if it was not enough to deal with the dragon, it would at least increase her chances of escaping. The dragon was too powerful, so powerful that Vicky lost the determination to fight it. The spaceship was severely damaged, and she had to leave. Once she landed, She could not imagine the scene of thousands of ancient corpses pouncing on her. Then, she saw something that shocked her. The shells that were flying toward the frost dragon seemed to have fallen into a swamp when they were within 500 meters of its body. Their speed decreased rapidly, and then all of them stopped. The 5 shells were suspended in midair, just like that. It's a domain. Vicky's heart skipped a beat. The powerful frost domain from the frost dragon, which was beyond grade 10, could freeze everything within range. Then, Vicky tapped on the screen and manually detonated the bombs. Boom, boom, boom. The bombs exploded one after another, annihilating the dragon. Vicky was delighted. She tried to reignite the engine that had stopped, and, at the same time, she pushed the control stick and pulled the spaceship upward, intending to accelerate and escape. And in front, Vicky looked up, and her expression changed drastically. A huge, indescribable object rose from the surface of the ice. The ice cracked, and like a mountain, it blocked the path of the spaceship. It was a jelly-like mountain of flesh covered in black scales, wriggling like a giant worm. It had a pair of giant bat wings that were thousands of meters tall. Black mucus flowed down its body, corroding the ice and blackening it. Vicky came to an emergency stop. Her face was pale as she looked at the indescribable thing in front of her. Immense fear filled her heart. This was clearly the legendary ancient invader. Only when one stood in front of it did they realize how insignificant they were, as well as the ridiculous words he had said earlier. The Ancient One. A low, ear-piercing voice rang out, carrying anger and mockery. Then, the mountain of flesh wriggled in the direction of the spaceship. It was as if a huge mountain of flesh had collapsed. It's not working. Failed. Power failure. Vicky tried to steer the spaceship away, but the spaceship's propulsion system failed. The spaceship plummeted and landed heavily on the ground. What do we do now? Vicky asked anxiously. Leave it to me again. You're better at spaceships, but I'm better than you when it comes to individual combat. Vicky jumped down from her seat, rushed into the weapons warehouse, and jumped into a mech. It was a 5-meter-tall black mech that completely covered her. It was equipped with a black sniper rifle and a black and red scimitar that was almost as tall as her. The huge barrel of the gun reflected a ghostly light. The scimitar that was made of super steel was enchanted by the most powerful mage of the Ancient One. Activate the spaceship's self-destruct program. Vicky ordered. The spaceship's cabin door opened, and the ejection system allowed the mech to fly out of the spaceship. Coupled with the mech's built-in propulsion system, it appeared thousands of meters away in the blink of an eye. Boom! With a loud bang, the spaceship that was crushed by Cthulhu self-destructed. Half of the fleet's arsenal and the spaceship's nuclear propulsion system exploded at the same time. Red flames exploded, and the terrifying explosion overturned Cthulhu. Its huge body disintegrated in the explosion. The aftershock swept through the remaining skeletons, and they turned into dust. The ice layers shattered, and everything melted and vaporized in the flames of the explosion. A mushroom cloud rose slowly. Vicky drove the mech away from the center of the explosion. However, even though she had escaped a few miles away, the aftershock of the explosion still overturned the mech, and it rolled a few times on the ice. Vicky pressed her hand against the ground to stabilize herself. She turned around and aimed her gun at the frost dragon that was swooping down and pulled the trigger at the same time. A golden red bullet spun out of the gun barrel, and the inscriptions engraved on it began to burn faster. The bullet pierced through the frost dragon's wing, and a huge bullet hole was created. Blood splattered in the air. Roar! The frost dragon roared and spat out a string of ice balls that fell toward Vicky. The ice balls landed and exploded, and the huge impact overturned the mech. Vicky drove the mech to dodge quickly, and after a forward roll, she half-knelt on the ground. She raised her hand and fired 2 more shots at the frost dragon that was pulling up. But this time, the frost WIRM was prepared. The bullets brushed past its wings, leaving only 2 scratches that were neither deep nor shallow, not to mention hitting any of its vital points. At the same time, a furious roar came from the center of the explosion. A huge figure flapped its wings and slowly rose into the air. More than half of the indescribable thing's lower body disappeared, but it was reforming at a speed visible to the naked eye. The 1,000-meter-long bat wings were full of holes, but they were also repairing at a speed visible to the naked eye. Although it did not have eyes, Vicky felt as if she was being stared at. She could even feel its anger that was almost tangible. This is not good. Vicky's expression was a little stiff. The frost dragon was already difficult enough to deal with, and they still could not kill the monster after sacrificing a battleship. It had become a terrifying threat, an ancient invader that could not be killed. The records in the ancient books were not lies. The mech was built for battle, and its escapability was limited. Moreover, the frost dragon was staring at her at a terrifying speed. She had almost no hope of escaping. Vicky's heart sank. She steered the mech away from Cthulhu while sniping at the frost dragon. She had already thought about it. Once she was in a desperate situation, she would detonate the mech. Even if it turned into ashes, she did not want to become the devil's puppet after death and then be killed here and there. Cthulhu's huge body rose into the air, and it flapped its huge bat wings and flew toward Vicky. It covered the sky and the sun, and the sky changed color. Chapter 2172. The Ancient still has such a weapon of mass destruction. Why didn't she use it last time? Meg sat on the griffin's back and looked at the huge mushroom cloud rising in the distance. The tremors transmitted from the ground shook the ice layer hundreds of miles away. Meg felt that an explosion of this scale was quite compatible with a mushroom cloud. He had already determined that the second battleship that suddenly appeared today was the Ancient's reinforcements that she had invited. Moreover, this reinforcements also carried the Ancient's weapon of mass destruction and was ready to attack and kill Cthulhu. Speaking of which, the Ancient might have been passed down from ancient times and did not restrict themselves to the improvement of individual strength. They developed their technology without restraint and possessed high-end weapons like battleships. Encountering Cthulhu that had been sealed since ancient times again, they could look forward to seeing if they could kill it completely. Meg knew himself well. If he was at the center of the explosion, he would probably be vaporized on the spot. Azzy, charge in that direction and speed up. Meg patted his old buddy. He wanted to see the result of this explosion personally. Whether Cthulhu was killed or seriously injured, it was very important information. Towards the Ancient Ones, he still maintained a respectful and distant attitude. If it was not related to real interests, he would not have complete trust. Damn it. Vicky's heart sank to the bottom. She raised her gun and shot 3 times at Cthulhu. However, the 2-meter-long wound did not even penetrate and was repaired in the blink of an eye. This huge guy had no weakness at all. A deep sense of helplessness made Vicky feel hopeless. She suddenly felt a little regretful. She shouldn't have come here so recklessly. It's been a long time since I tasted the Ancient. It's indeed the best to reminisce. A low and piercing voice rang out as Cthulhu leaned over and pounced at Vicky. Activate self-destruct program. Vicky held the joystick tightly with both hands and stared at the swooping Cthulhu. She felt a little sorry for her team members. She just brought them hope, but she cannot go back. A bright red countdown appeared on the screen, and the alarm became shrill. Vicky put away her big gun and took off the red machete, holding it with both hands. Live or die standing. This was her family's motto. Cthulhu's huge body cast a shadow of death as a chill enveloped her body. Vicky could almost see the dazzling light of the self-destruct. It was a pity that no one else could enjoy such a beautiful scenery. Swoosh! Swoosh! Just then, 2 cannonballs flew over and landed on Cthulhu's body and exploded. Cthulhu's half-recovered body was once again blasted into smithereens. The massive shockwave pushed its massive body back by hundreds of meters. What's this? Vicky's eyes lit up, and she subconsciously stopped the self-destruct program. The familiar fiery Thunderbolt armor-piercing bullet. This was the standard cannonball of the Ancient. Vicky fell to the ground and shielded her chest from the aftermath of the explosion. As soon as he raised his head, he saw a gray battleship slowly appearing in the sky. "I'll cover," says Vicky's SS. "Be careful of that frost dragon." Vicky looked at the frost dragon's dive toward the gray warship and said anxiously. Previously, she was ambushed by the frost dragons, which caused the warship to be damaged. Although she did not know who came to save her, if the warship was damaged again, they would all die here. The gray warship also accelerated and dived downward. Then it quickly rose from the left front. The frost dragon's claws swept across the side of the warship. Frost quickly condensed on the surface of the warship. "Beautiful," Vicky praised in her heart. If she could have done that, she wouldn't have been shot down from the sky. However, this was not the time for her to sit back and watch. The mechanical arm pressed hard on the ground, and the Vicky's mech bounced up and rushed toward the warship. The thrusters behind it spewed out blue flames as its speed was increased to the maximum. On the other side, Cthulhu, who was repelled, let out a roar. It recovered from its injuries and chased after the mech again. Although the gray warship's dive this time avoided the frost dragon's attack, it also missed the opportunity to retrieve the mech. The frost dragon changed its direction and rushed toward Vicky again. With a flap of its wings, countless icicles condensed out of thin air and turned into a rain of icicles that covered the warship. The gray warship's defense cannons were activated. Bullets poured out, and the icicles were broken. The area in front of them was instantly cleared. Instead of retreating, the warship moved forward and locked onto the frost dragon. The bullets formed a red line of fire in the air. Although the frost dragon dodged skillfully and had the help of the frost domain's defense, its body was soon injured. Dragon scales flew and blood splattered in the air. On the other hand, the frost dragon charged forward several times with the defense cannon's firepower, but the gray warship's ingenious flying skills avoided it. However, the icicles that exploded at close range still left big and small potholes on the warship. Mag saw such an exciting scene when he arrived at the scene. The gray warship was exchanging blows with the frost dragon in the air. It was dangerous. On the ground, a black mecha was sprinting. The flames that it spat out allowed it to cover 100 meters in a single step. It left an obvious trail on the ice. And behind the mecha, Cthulhu, whose lower body was blown off, flapped its huge bat wings and followed unhurriedly. Further away, a huge crater with a radius of a few thousand meters appeared on the ice field. All kinds of broken warship fragments were scattered around the crater. "What's going on now?" Meg's eyelids twitched. It was different from what he had imagined. Judging from that huge crater, the previous explosion was even more terrifying than he had imagined. After all, outside Chaos City, hundreds of 10th-tier powerhouses joined forces, but they didn't manage to make Cthulhu's head so miserable. But using a warship to sacrifice itself to Crassus? Was this ancient way of fighting so simple and violent? Unfortunately, even such a powerful explosion couldn't kill Cthulhu. And judging from its body's continuous recovery, this kind of injury was still within its recovery range. This was most likely the reason why the ancestors of the past could only seal it after paying an unimaginable price. It was like this tens of thousands of years ago, and it was still the same now. "Miss Shi, do you need help?" Meg took out his walkie-talkie and called Shi. The mecha that was sprinting on the ground was already shrouded by Cthulhu's shadow. The 5-meter-tall Gundam was no different from an ant in the face of a 1,000-meter-tall monster. Chapter 2173. Vicky was in despair. The appearance of the gray battleship gave her a glimmer of hope, but the shadow cast by the behemoth behind her completely wiped out this glimmer of hope. The frost dragon was already difficult for the gray battleship to handle. If she wanted it to take the risk to save her, both of them would fall to their deaths. "You should go. I can't leave." The mech slid on the ice for a while before coming to a stop. Vicky said calmly. She held the big gun in one hand and shot steadily and determinedly at one of Cthulhu's wings. She looked at the huge Cthulhu, and her heart sank to the bottom. Vicky's identity was extremely noble, and she was one of the top aristocrats among the ancients. Regardless of her identity, as a clansman, Vicky would do anything to save her. However, Cthulhu was too powerful and had this powerful frost dragon as a servant. Since it stopped trying to get close to it, she even lost the chance to take the risk of descending. Once the spaceship was controlled by the frost domain, she would lose all control and end up in the same situation as Vicky. Without a spaceship, they would not be able to escape from Cthulhu's grasp in this vast ice field. At this moment, a familiar number was connected to the line, and that person's familiar voice was heard. "Mishy, do you need help?" She turned her head and saw the majestic purple-striped griffin not far away, as well as the man standing on its back. "Yes, I need you to help me stop this frost dragon. I'm going to save my clansmen," she replied calmly without any pretense. Vicky, who was also on the line, was a little surprised. Was there another clansman here? She then looked up and saw the purple-striped griffin shimmering with purple-gold light under the sun. Compared to Cthulhu, it looked very delicate. However, in the next second, it turned into a bolt of purple lightning and crashed into the frost dragon. Vicky saw the small figure standing on the griffin, brandishing the long sword in his hand at the huge frost WIRM. A human? Isn't this too ridiculous? Vicky's mouth twitched. She then saw the frost domain that was almost solid being slashed apart by the sword. The frost dragon clashed with its dragon claws. A crisp sound rang out, as if metal and stone had struck each other. The frost WIRM was actually sent flying back 1,000 meters by the slash. The purple lightning reappeared where the frost WIRM had been. So strong. Vicky's mouth gaped open as she stared at the purple-striped griffin in astonishment. Regardless of whether it was the purple-striped griffin's terrifying speed in that instant or the human on the griffin's back that had slashed out with his sword, they had all subverted her imagination. She'd been on the Norland continent for more than a year, but she'd always kept a low profile. Apart from being deceived a few times, she hadn't had any conflicts with anyone. According to the records in the ancient books, the top power level on the Norland continent was 10th tier, and no one could break through to the god tier. But today, the frost dragon gave her the feeling that it was more powerful than a level 10 dragon, but it had yet to reach the divine level. As for the man standing on the back of the purple-striped griffin, he gave her the feeling that he was a god-level powerhouse, an existence on par with her grandfather. There's no time to hesitate. Prepare to connect. There's only one chance, she said coldly. The electromagnetic cannon charged and fired. The gray battleship descended vertically. The suspension cable was lowered, and it flew rapidly towards the mechas on the ground. Vicky snapped back to her senses. She pressed the trigger and fired all the bullets in her gun at Cthulhu. She turned and sprinted forward. Then, she activated the thrusters under her feet and leaped up. Dozens of enchanted bullets hit the same spot. In the end, they still penetrated Cthulhu's right wing. Its wings, which were already riddled with wounds, flapped, and its huge body made a turn in midair. The electromagnetic cannon then crashed into Cthulhu's huge body and then exploded. The explosion swept out. Even Meg and Rankster, who were far away, had to retreat to avoid the attack. A gray battleship rushed out amidst the flames. The mechas hanging below quickly retracted, and then the cargo hatch was closed. Rescue successful. Retreat, she said calmly. At the same time, she fired 2 cannonballs, one of which was aimed at the frost WIRM. Meg took out 2 wind runes and slapped them on the purple-striped griffin's wings as he ordered. "Ozzy, go south." The purple-striped griffin turned around without hesitation. It turned into a purple light and disappeared into the sky. Meg leaned against the griffin's back. He grabbed a protruding scale tightly with one hand and felt the cold wind blow past his face. Ozzy, who had the acceleration rune, was 2 times faster than his limit. Although it only lasted for a short 10 minutes, it had already brought him out of danger. They continued to head south for about half an hour. A gray battleship hovered in midair. "Thank you for your help." She dialed the walkie-talkie and said sincerely, "If not for Meg's appearance today and decisive help, Vicky would not have been saved. It's okay. As long as it's against Cthulhu, we are friends, Meg said with a smile. Although the Ancient One's actions were a little strange, they had indeed killed tens of thousands of undead army and seriously injured Cthulhu and Rankster. Cthulhu might be able to recover with its powerful recovery ability, but Rankster was not an Ancient One. The string of bullet holes left on his body had already caused his strength to decrease significantly. This was also the reason why he could defeat him with one strike earlier. This is the reward. The cargo hold of the battleship opened, and a black heavy cannon was slowly lowered to the ground. There were more than 10 boxes accompanying it. An equivalent exchange. Not bad. Meg nodded in satisfaction. He likes sensible girls like she. Goodbye, she said calmly. The gray battleship started and accelerated, disappearing into the sky. Meg got Ozzy to land. He used the space box that Jonas borrowed to put the main cannon and cannonballs in before continuing to flee south. As long as they were not out of the ice field, there was no such thing as safety. You're she. Vicky stood beside the mecha and looked at the woman who walked out of the cockpit in surprise. You recognize me? She looked at her with a calm expression, but there was a hint of surprise in her eyes. You're so famous. How can I not recognize you? You're the champion of the last PUBG competition and the record holder for headshots. Marksman She. Vicky looked at She with starry eyes. And I also know that you know who I am. Vicky Roosevelt, the third daughter of the Roosevelt family, and the record holder for the youngest captain of the Ancient Ones. She looked at Vicky calmly with some confusion. So, I'm very confused. How did you crash? This. Vicky's expression turned awkward. Chapter 2174. Vicky was indeed an excellent captain. She was the record holder for being the youngest captain in history. Her family did not deliberately give her this title to flatter her. She was obsessed with warships when she was young and had an amazing talent in piloting them. Therefore, at the age of 8, she could already skillfully control a warship and complete a series of operations on her own to pass the captain's assessment. Of course, this monstrous achievement belonged to the gentle Vicky. If she was the one piloting the warship at the beginning of the battle, she would definitely be able to make the most correct response when the frost dragon appeared and safely get the warship out of danger. She felt a little regretful at the thought of this. The Black Cat was the best warship for the Ancient Ones. It was extremely expensive to build, and half a fleet's ammunition was used on it. What exploded on the ice field just now was not fireworks, but money. That man from before? Who is he? Vicky changed the topic and looked at She. The man from before also saved her. As a person who would repay kindness, she needed to know his name first. Alex, she said. Alex. Vicky frowned and thought that the name sounded familiar. Suddenly, her eyes lit up. He's the dragon-slaying warrior. Alex? In the past year or so, Vicky had been traveling around the Norland continent, and the most legendary stories she had heard were all about the man named Alex. The emotional entanglement and story between him and the elven princess made her want to adapt it into an opera and had already written part of the script. She did not expect that after going around in circles, she would be saved by Alex. It was a pity that it was not the usual hero saving the damsel in distress. Otherwise, Miss Black Cat intervened in Alex and Irina's relationship and caused them to part ways would be a hit. It's him. She nodded. Vicky collected her thoughts and looked at She before bowing solemnly. She then said, Thank you for saving me. I'll repay you when I return to the buried city. This is a letter of entrustment from Mr. Ferdinand. He asked me to bring you back to the underground city if I meet you. She raised her hand and showed him a letter of entrustment. At the bottom of the letter was the signature of Ferdinand Roosevelt. How could Grandpa do that? Vicky widened her eyes. She did not expect her grandfather to issue a commission. That's how you could find me so accurately. Vicky looked at She. Did Grandpa do something to the Black Cat? She said calmly, Every warship of the Ancient Ones is pre-installed with a positioning system so that they can still find the warship in the event of an accident. You should be aware of this. Vicky was a little. She knew, and that was why she had not activated the Black Cat in the past 2 years. But I can't go back now. I still have something important to do. Vicky looked at She and said seriously, there are still people who need me. They need me to help them achieve their dreams. She looked at Vicky and said after a moment of silence, once I'm done with my observation mission, you must return to the dungeon with me. How long will that be? I'm not sure yet. Vicky lowered her head and looked at her toes, not saying a word. She knew that she was not discussing it with her, but informing her of the decision. The commission and her grandfather's signature was a military order. Norland Continent may look backward, but it's actually a very special place. The premise is that you have to get off this spaceship before you can understand this world better. I've been here for more than a year, and I still don't dare to say that I understand the world. But I'm surprised every day. Vicky looked up at She and said seriously. She was an indifferent observer on this spaceship. However, Vicky believed that she would not be able to return to this world for at least 3 to 5 years once she got off this spaceship and came into contact with the mortal world. She wanted to refute Vicky's statement, but the delicious braised pork was indeed beyond her imagination and understanding. It even appeared in her dreams for the past 2 days. Perhaps there are many other delicacies in this world. She thought to herself, but she said calmly, the lounge is open. You can use it. Thank you, Vicky said and walked to the lounge. She really needed to calm down now. It did not feel good to be close to death, or rather, it was terrible. Alex, I'll remember you. Vicky took off her combat uniform and slid into the bathtub. Meg returned to the command center and looked for Jonas to change the plan at the last minute. Looking at the miserable expression on old Cheong's face, Meg patted him on the shoulder and smiled like an old capitalist. The main cannon from the Ancient One was a killing machine against the undead army. Meg did not know who was piloting the crashed battleship just now, but he could not help but want to scold her for being a prodigal. The bomb that exploded just now was enough to wipe out half of the million-strong undead army. Okay. What one had to do was to carefully find the gathering place of the undead army, drop a few bombs, and then slip away before Cthulhu appeared and appear at the next gathering point. However, this prodigal ran to Cthulhu and listened. Judging from the voice in the previous conversation channel, it should be a female captain. Judging from She's risky rescue, it was either an old acquaintance of hers or someone of high status. She was a cold-blooded animal. This was something that Meg was very sure of. What happened in the ice field earlier? Irina's voice came from behind. Explosion. A violent explosion. Meg turned to look at her and recounted what happened earlier in detail. Didn't you say that she's the only Ancient One on the Norland Continent? Irina's beautiful brows furrowed. Perhaps she didn't understand the situation. Otherwise, she wouldn't have let that battleship launch a meaningless suicide attack and put herself in danger, Meg speculated. This was also what he was thinking on the way here earlier. That terrifyingly calm woman was not someone who would put herself in danger easily. Irina nodded slightly and said, Lewis was looking for you earlier. The dragons intend to form a team and enter the ice field to clean up the skeleton army before the battle to reduce the pressure on the front line during the battle. There's no need to go. Cthulhu has moved all the undead army under the ice. We can't find a target at all. Instead, we'll become Cthulhu's prey. Meg shook his head. The dragons are our core air attack force. If we suffer heavy losses before the battle, we won't be able to fight this battle. All right, the people from Lantis are here. Dexter wants to see you, Irina said. Chapter 2175. In the underground city, on the top floor of a 1,000-meter-tall building, a hale and hearty old man with short silver hair was sitting behind his desk, frowning as he looked at the documents on the virtual screen. Sir, a man in a suit pushed the door open anxiously and anxiously said, The Black Cat's signal has appeared. But what? The old man put away the virtual screen and stared at the secretary with a pair of sharp eyes. But we had just finished locating it when the Black Cat self-destructed. The secretary's forehead was full of cold sweat, but he still quickly said, This is the image sent back before the Black Cat self-destructed. Self-destruct. The old man's body swayed, and he reached out to support himself on the table. He could barely control his emotions as he looked at the image displayed on the virtual screen opened by the secretary. It was a huge, squirming mountain of flesh, flapping its huge bat wings and pouncing towards the battleship. Then there was a loud bang, and the image was engulfed in flames before it disappeared. It was only a short 10-second video, but it was still extremely terrifying. Cthulhu. Ferdinand clenched his fists, and the aura that erupted from his anger made the legs of the secretary at the side tremble. This was the second time he saw Sir Ferdinand so angry. The last time was when the third young master went missing near Arila 200 years ago, and when he appeared again, he was already crazy. He knew why Sir was so angry. The Black Cat was the spaceship of Miss Vicky, whom Sir doted on the most. Miss secretly piloted the spaceship away from home 2 years ago. Sir Ferdinand had ordered to search for her for 2 years, and had been trying to track the Black Cat signal. No one would have thought that after finally tracking the signal today, it would send back such a regretful, self-destruct image. A headless Cthulhu was still Cthulhu. What kind of desperate situation would make Miss Vicky press the button to self-destruct? It was her most beloved Black Cat, the battleship that she named herself. Ferdinand stood up and said in a deep voice, "Gather the first fleet and follow me to the Norland continent." "Yes." The secretary replied respectfully and turned to leave. "Sir." Just then, a young man rushed in with an excited expression. The secretary was slightly shocked. Sir was in a bad mood now, and couldn't help but worry that his subordinate's recklessness would anger Sir. Miss Vicky is currently on Captain She's warship." The young man looked at Ferdinand and said, "What?" Ferdinand's eyes lit up. "You're saying that she saved Vicky? Is the news accurate?" The Secretary General was also shocked. They were so close to Cthulhu that Ms. Vicky had no choice but to detonate the battleship. "How could you bring Ms. Vicky down?" "Look, this is the image that Captain She just sent back." The young man turned on the virtual screen and played a video. The video started with a huge mushroom cloud rising from the ice field. This should be the video of the Black Cat's self-destruction. Then the image zoomed in on the ice field, and a small mecha was being chased by Cthulhu. "It's Vicky." Ferdinand clenched his fists. This mecha was a gift from him to Vicky, and the black coating was painted by her personally. The mecha, which was more than 5 meters tall, was like an ant that could be trampled to death at any time in front of the huge Cthulhu. Then, she piloted the battleship and joined the battle, repelling Cthulhu with 4 shells. Everyone heaved a sigh of relief when they saw this. It seemed that she had successfully rescued Vicky with her excellent piloting skills. However, right at this moment, a frost dragon appeared and intercepted the battleship. The two began an extremely intense battle, and it was hard to tell who had the upper hand. What a powerful frost dragon. I didn't expect such a powerhouse to appear on the Norland continent in just a few hundred years. "It's a pity that it's controlled by Cthulhu," Ferdinand said in a low voice. To be able to engage in such an intense battle with a mecha at such a close distance, this frost dragon's ability was obviously above 10th tier, but it had not crossed that threshold. The battle back then had damaged the foundation of the Norland continent, and it was difficult for powerhouses to appear on the Norland continent. It was also because of this that the ancients left and entered the underground city to build a new world. However, with such a powerful enemy in the way, it was difficult to separate. The battle was intense, so how did she successfully rescue Vicky? Everyone could not help but wonder. On the other side, Cthulhu had already approached the mecha again. The situation was critical. Right at this moment, a purple lightning bolt appeared in the distant sky and arrived in front of them in the blink of an eye. After a short pause, the purple lightning bolt charged towards the frost dragon. The battleship piloted by She was able to escape. While firing the missiles, it dove towards the mecha on the ground. The purple lightning bolt crashed into the frost dragon at an astonishing speed, and the powerful frost dragon was sent flying. Everyone then saw that the purple lightning bolt was actually a purple striped griffin, and on the griffin's back stood a man holding a heavy sword. The frost dragon was sent flying by his sword. As so powerful, the Secretary General could not help but exclaim. The young man's mouth was also agape. This person is already half a step into the godly realm. Unbelievable. Ferdinand's shock was no less than the two of them. To enter the godly realm on the Norland continent, this young man's talent was really impressive. While the frost dragon was distracted, she finally found an opportunity to dock with the mecha and escape with the mecha. The scene ended there. Great, great. Ferdinand paced around the office, unable to hide his joy. The great joy and sorrow came too suddenly, and he could not handle it. This young man is great. If there's a chance, I must meet him. Ferdinand sat back down with a smile. Sir, the First Fleet. The Secretary General asked carefully. There's no hurry. I have to wait for Xi's report. Ferdinand raised his hand and looked at the Secretary General. What's the situation at our Ila? The miasma has been spreading in our Ila for the past few days, and no one can go within a 5-kilometer radius to check the situation inside. However, from the observation of the outside, there's no other abnormal situation, the Secretary General answered quickly. Ferdinand's knuckles tapped on the table lightly, and he suddenly stopped. He said in a deep voice, Let the 2nd Artillery Regiment go to our Ila and be on standby. Meg soon met Dexter and Gina. Gina bowed slightly to Meg before leaving the room. It's been a long journey, Meg said to Dexter. The warriors of the Lantis tribe came all the way north from the southernmost tip of the Norland continent and were the first to reach the front line. The war is urgent, and I dare not delay, Dexter said with a smile. Meg nodded and said, I've already asked the dwarves to forge the peachwood weapons for rank stir. You can rest at the front line for the next few days. Of course, if there are suitable magic casters, they can also help to build the fortifications. Chapter 2176. I will make arrangements for this. Dexter nodded. He hesitated for a while before saying, Other than that, I have something to report to Lord Alex. Meg looked at him. There was a strange movement under Lantis last night. The sky pillar shook violently for the entire night, and it didn't stop. This has never happened in Lantis' thousands of years of history, so I'm worried that it might have something to do with the devil, Dexter said. There's such a thing? Meg frowned. Even Lantis didn't know when it had sunk to the bottom of the sea, let alone the reason. However, it was indeed unusual for there to be a strange movement under Lantis at such a time. I will go and investigate this. Meg nodded. He was going to make a trip back to Chaos City to transport the cannons. It seemed like he had to make a trip to Lantis as well. After that, Meg brought Dexter to see Dominic. He was basically in charge of the front line now, so he was naturally the most suitable person to make arrangements for Lantis personnel. Furthermore, Lantis didn't have any logistics, so the Roth Empire had to take care of it. After settling the matters, Meg and Irina rode their flying steeds south. If another great old one breaks the seal, it will be troublesome. Irina's expression turned grave after hearing Meg's explanation. I have to see it for myself and contact Xi at the same time to see if she knows anything about this. Meg nodded and sent a message to Xi. Soon, Meg received Xi's reply. Under Lantis, Cthulhu's old nest, our Ela city, is sealed. I have already sensed the strange movement and reported it to the underground city, but I haven't received any feedback yet. Our Ela city. Meg frowned. He didn't expect that legendary city to really exist. If that was the case, it would be troublesome. Cthulhu was gathering an undead army of 1 million to head south, and at the same time, there was a strange movement in our Ela, which was sealed under the sea. It was hard not to link the two together. What's inside? Meg sent a new message. After a long time, Meg finally received Xi's reply. Before Cthulhu was sealed, there was a miasma barrier outside our Ela. Cthulhu's loyal servants were all hiding in the city. Therefore, the ancestors could only sink Lantis and seal it in the deepest trench in the boundless sea realm. In order to prevent the spawns of the stars from coming out and destroying the seal, the ancients had already dragged it into the underground city countless years ago and completely separated it from the Norland continent. However, judging from the star spawns that have appeared in the underground city from time to time over the years, they are probably still alive. Mag's brows furrowed tightly after reading the silence. What's wrong? Irina leaned forward and looked at the message. Her expression was grave. What do you plan to do? Irina asked Meg. This is no longer something we can handle. Cthulhu and the undead army in the north have already exhausted all the races. If we let them know that there might be a threat behind them, their morale will definitely collapse. Meg shook his head. So, we have to push the blame to the ancients. Meg stared at the communicator in his hand. After thinking for a while, he sent another message to She. In the spaceship's lounge, she sat by the window and looked at the message she'd just received on the virtual screen. Her emotionless face showed some hesitation. Vicky, who had taken a shower and changed back into the black Lolita dress, walked in. She glanced at She and subconsciously glanced at the virtual screen. Are Cthulhu's spawns of the stars going to break free from the seal too? Vicky exclaimed. This might be the reason why Cthulhu didn't rush to send the undead army southward after the anomaly in Arila. She nodded. With Vicky's identity, there was no need to hide this from her. Vicky pondered and said, with the Norland continent's strength, just Cthulhu and the undead army alone are enough of a headache. So, he wants to push the blame to us? He wants us to help him deal with our Ela. He doesn't have a choice, she said calmly. Alex was able to unite the originally divided and chaotic races of the Norland continent in such a short time and form a large and powerful allied army. She was already impressed. The ancients were once part of the Norland continent, and our Ela is now in the underground city. Why can't we solve this problem? Vicky looked at She and said seriously, This is not something I can decide, she said calmly. I know who can decide. Vicky opened her bracelet and connected to the battleship network. She then dialed a number that she had not called for 2 years. After a short call, Vicky took the initiative to hang up the phone. She looked at She and said, You can reply to him now. Also, please tell him for me that this is a thank you. She nodded slightly. She looked at Vicky differently, but she still quickly sent a message to Meg. Sir Ferdinand had agreed to completely deal with our Ela city, which meant that the threat from the bottom of the Boundless Sea realm had been removed. The ancients' technology might not be able to deal with a powerful invader like Cthulhu, but if they could not even deal with the servant races in our Ela city, then it would be a little unreasonable. Meg had just gotten off the Griffin when he received the message from She. The message was as concise as usual. The threat of our Ela has been removed. This is a thank you to the person you saved. The person I saved previously has solved the problem, Meg said to Irina with a smile. That person seems to be of a high status, Irina said in surprise. Someone who can influence the decision-making. Meg nodded in agreement. Good deeds were indeed rewarded. He did not have to worry about the consequences. Please ensure the safety of the Lantisdian residents. Meg sent the message, kept the communicator, and walked quickly into the city lord's residence. Meg did not tell Michael about Arila. He loaded the cannon and left the city lord's residence. Meg and Irina went to the ice cream shop, but they only watched from afar for a while. They saw the 2 children sitting by the window and eating ice cream happily, so they left with peace of mind. Meg then went to the Peach Mountain in the Dragon Territory. The Peach Mountain stretched for thousands of acres, and half of it had already been cut down. There were orcs and elves cutting trees all over the mountain. There were also a few large-scale military factories that were rushing to produce peach, wood arrows, and other weapons. The completed weapons were transported to the front line by the giant dragons, because it was on the way. With this efficiency, we shouldn't have to worry about the lack of weapons. Meg nodded. He was rather pleased to see the wooden boxes stacked into a small mountain on the giant dragons that took off from time to time. In a chapter. Chapter 2177. The various races of the Norland continent's allied army arrived at the front line one after another. Under Meg and Dominic's arrangements, they started to set up the defensive line. Meanwhile, the frontline fortifications were completed beyond expectations after receiving the support of the various races. They even paved a 100-meter wide path of glutinous rice and dug a 100-meter deep trench in front of the Biligus mountain range. Digging a hole was very simple for the demons who were good at digging. The glutinous rice path bet all the glutinous rice that was transported to the front line. Apart from the gaps in the 3 canyons, the entire mountain range was paved to prevent the skeletons from climbing up. Meg sat on the griffin and inspected the Biligus mountain range, which was basically completed. Black cannons were erected on the front line. There were 3,000 of them. The dwarves used their entire race's resources to supply the cannons, displaying their terrifying talent and ability in forging. Apart from the cannons, simple explosives were also continuously transported to the front line. There were 3 types: large cups of explosives. They could be used to replace the stones in the catapults. The range was about 1,000 to 1,500 meters. They could also be carried by giant dragons and other flying races. The large cups of explosives were usually used for Hercules to toss them with their bare hands. Strong trolls and orcs could be thrown hundreds of meters away. This allowed them to have a wide range of long-range attacks. Small cups of explosives were about the size of a fist. They were suitable for humans who were relatively weak for close-range defense. The damage was limited, and they were usually thrown about 100 meters away. The advantage of explosives was that they were easy to make and had a wide range of uses. Now, there were 10 factories that specialized in making explosives at the foot of the Biligus mountain range. The most exaggerated ones were the 3 canyons. The open canyons were the only openings left in the Biligus mountain range. When the undead army attacked, the 3 canyons would be easily breached. Then, what awaited them would be a meat grinder filled with killing spell formations and traps. The 2 sides of the canyons were set up with the allied army's best archers and magic casters. They would give the undead army a head-on blow and kill them as much as possible. At the end of the canyons were the allied army's most powerful close-range combat troops. They were the last and most important line of defense. They would face the powerful undead army directly and engage in the most intense close-range combat. This was the layout of the entire battlefield. According to the Report of the Centuries, the undead army in the icy plains had begun to gather and were moving towards the Gus mountain range. However, the news was not clear because the death rate of the Sentinels had begun to rise rapidly. Therefore, the Gus mountain range had officially entered a state of war. While the engineers were reinforcing the fortifications, the Alliance army was ready for battle at any time. Meg raised his hand, and the virtual screen lit up. There was a red dot moving slowly on it. She lent it to him, and the red dot was Cthulhu's location. As the commander of the Alliance army, being able to observe the movements of the enemy leader was undoubtedly the same as using a cheat code. If it wasn't for the fact that they really couldn't win, this would be the perfect weapon to kill the leader. You knew it was there, and you knew that as long as you killed it, the battle would be over. But you just can't kill it, don't you think I'm angry? However, one thing was for sure. Cthulhu had indeed begun to gather the undead army to invade the south. Lewis had once led dozens of giant dragons into the ice plains to attack some undead armies, but he was attacked by Lantist and Crusu. After more than 10 giant dragons were killed or injured, he was stopped by Meg. The giant dragons were the Alliance army's very precious aerial attack power, and they absolutely could not suffer heavy losses before the final battle. Just then, a few explosions came from the ice plains. Although it was very far away, the ground could still faintly feel the tremors. Everyone subconsciously looked in the direction of the ice plains. They could not see anything, and they were not too surprised either. They had gotten used to the occasional explosions these days. Some people said that a mage had gone deep into the ice plains and attacked the undead army from time to time. However, no one knew who it was, and no one knew if the news was true. Meg listened attentively. There were a total of 18 explosions. Others might not know, but he knew where the explosions came from. These few days, Xi's warship had been cruising around the ice plains. Relying on her precise control of Cthulhu's location, she went in and out 7 times and launched air attacks on the undead army. According to the feedback she gave Meg last night, She had eliminated more than 100,000 skeleton soldiers in the past few days, which was a remarkable achievement. Naturally, Meg could not ask for more. If the Alliance army were to deal with 100,000 skeleton soldiers, who knew how much they would have to pay to wipe them out? Therefore, his impression of she also rose sharply. At the end of the canyon in the middle, thousands of demons were digging. It was said that the mage was planning to make a fire pit here and let the demons that rushed there experience a baptism of fire before being attacked by the Alliance army. Boss, we've been here for a few days. We've been digging here every day. What can we fight? Mon tossed a piece of ice behind him and scratched his head at Sargeras. The Burning Legion also stopped what they were doing and looked at Sargeras. What's the hurry? When the undead army comes, you'll have plenty of chances to fight. Sargeras rolled his eyes and punched the ice in front of him. A 2-meter deep hole appeared, and the ice was evaporated by the hot air. This was already the third day that they had followed the team from Chaos City to the front lines. During these past few days, they had been helping with the construction and hadn't seen a single skeleton. Not to mention the fact that Mond and the others couldn't stand the loneliness. Even he was getting a little tired. However, as the leader of the Burning Legion, he could not show it. These things will naturally be arranged by Alex and the rest. We just have to do it, Sargeras continued. Oh, Mon nodded and did not dare to ask any more questions. Hee, let's do it well. When we go back, we'll go to Mr. Mac's place to eat Ruggiamo, Keel said with a smile. The Burning Legion's eyes lit up when they heard the word Ruggiamo, and they were immediately motivated. Sargeras looked up at the purple-striped griffin flying slowly in the sky with narrowed eyes. He secretly took out a photographic stone and recorded a few scenes. He wanted to show it to Little Boss when he went back. Maybe she would like it too. Sargeras couldn't help but smile at the thought of the Little Boss. He touched the little ring on his chest and thought about what he should bring back as a gift for the Little Boss this time. Oh, right. The snow fox fur in the Gus Mountain Range is very famous. It would be nice if he could bring one back and make it into clothes for Little Boss. Chapter 2178. Lulu, look at what this is. In the arsenal at the foot of the Gus Mountain Range, Mabai walked up to Lulu and took out a small furry beast with a drooping head. It looked like it was about to die. Snow Fox. Lulu looked at the small beast in Mabai's hand and asked in surprise. Yes, I saw an orc catch it outside just now and was about to roast it. I exchanged it with 10 peach wood arrows. Mabai smiled and threw the Snow Fox into Lulu's arms. He said with a smile, "This Snow Fox skin is good stuff. It can keep you warm in the cold. You can skin it and take it back to make a small jacket for your wife." Lulu caught the Snow Fox carefully and looked at the obvious arrow wound on its neck with pity in her eyes. Then, she looked up at Mabai and said, "Master, Cece definitely won't wear clothes made of animal fur. Can I keep the Snow Fox?" Mabai was stunned. Seeing Lulu's sincere expression, he could only wave his hand and say, "Forget it. It's up to you. Anyway, it's yours as long as you can save it. But Disciple's wife is really a kind-hearted person." "Thank you." A smile appeared on Lulu's face as he hurriedly squatted down. First, he injected a bit of force of nature into the dying Snow Fox to protect its vitality. Then, he helped to stop the bleeding from its wound and sprinkled a bit of healing powder on its wound before tying it up with a strip of cloth. Druids were the children of the forest. They would not take the initiative to ask for everything in nature except for the need to survive, let alone take the life of a living creature. After being treated and bandaged, the Snow Fox woke up. It looked up at Lulu warily and seemed to let down its guard very quickly. It looked around and directly burrowed into Lulu's clothes. Only its little head poked out to look around carefully. Hey, this little fellow really came back to life. Mabai was astonished. Just now, this little guy looked like he was about to die. He didn't expect that after Lulu's manipulation, he would come back to life. Nature magic was indeed miraculous. Lulu also smiled and reached out a finger to gently touch the Snow Fox's head. Nature magic came from nature, and when it was fed back to nature, it would have an even more powerful effect. Cece will like it if we can bring it back. Lulu stroked the little fellow's fluffy head. Its hair was exceptionally soft. Malbai picked up a water bottle and gulped down a few mouthfuls of water. He wiped his mouth and said, "All right, we've rested enough. It's time to go back and continue working." Lulu also drank 2 mouthfuls of water and followed Malbai back to the workshop. "Bro, did you bring your own food?" A knight asked the other knight who was feeding the black donkey with a smile. "This is my mount. It's a companion, not food," Conti said calmly as he stroked the black donkey's head. "You're using a donkey as your mount." This time, not only the knight who asked the question, but many warriors who were resting at the side also turned their heads to look at Conti and his black donkey with astonishment. During this period of time, the Allied army had been disrupted and merged together, so they had started to do cooperative training. They had seen all kinds of strange things, but this was the first time they had seen an ordinary-looking black donkey as a mount. "Yes, that's it." Conti nodded seriously as he continued to feed his black donkey. Everyone looked at each other, but no one dared to provoke him. This seemingly old-fashioned knight had defeated a 7th-tier knight who had tried to challenge him yesterday. The name of Connie Nicholas was quite famous in this defensive zone. Connie fed the black donkey with grass, and then let go of the rope to let it play with the war horses at the side. He had also come to the front line with Chaos City's team, and was assigned to the front line. Although there was a cliff that was hundreds of meters high as a natural wall, this was still the most dangerous front line on the battlefield. Once the skeletons broke through the defensive line, they would have to defend the front line with their lives. Wow, what a satisfying battle. Vicky jumped out of the mech with excitement on her little face. The battleship bombarded from the sky, and the mech swept the ground. This was the 3rd time she worked together, and their teamwork was getting better. The battleship took off and quickly left before the silver dragon in the sky arrived. They retreated from the battlefield. 50,000. She gave a short number. This was the result they had achieved in this battle. The 50,000 skeletons were annihilated by them again. "Sister She, why don't I pilot the battleship next time?" Vicky looked at She and begged. She had not given up. She wanted to pilot the battleship again to prove her piloting skills. As the youngest captain of the Ancient Ones, Vicky had her pride. "I'm the only one who can pilot my battleship." She's tone was firm, and there was no room for negotiation. Vicky stuck out her tongue. In fact, she was just asking casually. She didn't have much hope. Just like her black cat, no one had ever been able to borrow it from her. Now that she thought about it, she could not help but feel sad. Such a good battleship was gone because of her. "Oh yes, when is our next attack? Didn't the underground city send supplies? Did they send another spaceship? What about the first fleet?" Vicky asked. "This is the last attack. The other skeletons have been gathered by Cthulhu. If we attack again, we will be in danger." She shook her head and looked at Vicky. "The Ancient Ones are still carrying out the underground city's secret plan. They don't intend to let the Norland continent know about the existence of the underground city. Unless the battle goes out of control, they will not send the first fleet. Doesn't that person know?" "He's tight-lipped." "How do you know if he's tight-lipped or not?" After a moment of silence, she said, "When they fight, we can provide support from the side at a safe distance, but we won't appear on the battlefield." "Okay." Vicky was now a tool. She could not participate in the decision-making and did not have much personal freedom. She could not help but feel guilty when she thought of her members who had lost their leader and could not perform and could only rely on their remaining money to survive. "Sister She, I would like to go to Rodu," Vicky said. She glanced at her. She had heard Vicky's tragic story these days and knew what she wanted to do in Rodu. She thought for a while and nodded. "Okay." Vicky's eyes lit up. She did not expect She to be so straightforward. She hesitated and said, "Do you have money on you?" She took out a black card. Vicky was speechless. "I have this too. I'm talking about the currency in circulation on the Norland continent. Gold coins, silver coins, dragon coins, etc." "I don't." She shook her head. "As an observer, how can you not have money? Don't you eat on the ground?" Vicky glared. Speaking of eating, she thought of the delicious red braised pork. She shook her head and said, "I never pay for my meals." Vicky raised her eyebrows. She was indeed the top female soldier to be able to say that she was eating and dashing in such a righteous manner. If she had this ability, she would not have been in this state for the past 2 years. Chapter 2179. In the depths of the ice field, a snowstorm swept over. In the center of the storm, a huge figure was moving forward slowly. And in front of this huge figure was a black undead army that stretched for miles. More and more skeletons crawled out from under the ice and joined the army. Pairs of red eyes glowed in the dark snowstorm. Their orderly footsteps were even more eerie. And beside Cthulhu, there was a huge bone dragon formed by countless skeletons. Its height was close to 1,000 meters. Josh stood with his hands behind his back on top of the bone dragon's head. His eyes were as black as ink, and his thin lips were also dyed in blackish purple. He looked demonic and cold. "Alex, I will tear you into pieces." Josh's cold voice echoed in the ice field. "You can't even suppress the obsession of a small human." Cthulhu's mocking voice sounded. "That fellow ruined my plans." "This is not only his obsession, but also mine," Josh said with a ferocious expression. "If not for him, I would have come out long ago, and I wouldn't have lost a part of my divine spirit. When we conquer this world again, everything will still be ours. This day will come very soon." Terrifying ravings echoed in the ice field, making the lonely ice field even more terrifying. At the bottom of the boundless sea realm, Lantist, a middle-aged merman, looked at the king standing in front of the sky pillar and respectfully said, "Your Majesty, all our people have evacuated to a position far away from the sky pillar, according to your orders. We have also set up a defense spell formation." "Good." The king nodded, but as he looked at the sky pillar that was shaking more and more violently, his brows were still furrowed. The sky pillar had been acting strangely for many days. He received a letter from Lord Alex the day before yesterday, and immediately arranged for his people to evacuate. Alex said that the strangeness here was indeed related to the devil. However, he told them not to panic. He would solve this problem, but asked them to stay away from the sky pillar. As the king, he had to do more for his people. If the problem was not solved as Alex said, he had to be the first to know what might happen and how to deal with it. The sky pillar shook even more violently, as if something was going to escape uncontrollably. On this day, the aurora was high in the sky above the ice field of the extreme north, and the night was as bright as day. A sharp horn sounded from the ice field, following which streaks of fiery light soared into the sky above the Gus mountain range, emitting a deafening sound. The sound of a bugle horn soared into the sky. The Allied soldiers who were sleeping beside the bonfire quickly got up and went their separate ways according to the plan. The covers of the cannons were opened, and the cannoneers adjusted their angles. The pitch-black cannons were aimed at the icy plains, ready to fire. The Dragon Clan rose into the air in a formation. 100 giant dragons formed a group and floated above the Gus mountain range, ready to strike. This was the signal that the vanguard of the undead army was 30 kilometers away from the front line. In the depths of the ice plains, 2 red flames rose one after another, lasting and bright. 2nd Battalion Commander, do you see that fire? Aim and fire. Meg ordered as he stood beside a main cannon. The knight raised his thumb and gestured at the red lights seriously. Meg rolled his eyes and said, "All right, stop gesturing. Just hit in that direction. Every time you hit, it's a little bit to the left and right, so that there's a little time difference." "Yes," the knight replied. The cannoneers loaded the cannoneers into the cannons and pressed the ignition button. Boom, boom. 2 huge cannons that were dozens of meters long let out a deafening roar. 2 silver cannoneers with red tails streaked across the sky and flew toward the icy plains. On the 100-mile front line, the Allied soldiers looked at this scene in shock. Not long after, a series of explosions rang out in the icy plains like thunder. The tremors could be felt clearly even in the Gus Mountain range dozens of miles away. I wonder where the commander-in-chief got such an amazing artifact. If there were a few more of them, the undead army wouldn't have to worry about not being wiped out. Mike looked at the huge cannon not far away and couldn't help but sigh. Compared to the cannons produced by the City Lord's mansion, this huge cannon couldn't be compared in terms of appearance or power. Although he knew that the blueprint of the cannon was given by Alex, he still didn't expect him to have built two such powerful cannons himself. At this time, on the icy plains 30 miles away from the Gus Mountain range, the range of the explosion was extremely wide. The explosion of the neatly arranged ancient corpses was wiped out. There were thousands of them. However, the explosion didn't affect the momentum of the undead army at all. The empty space was quickly filled up. The black mass of the undead army continued to charge toward the Gus Mountain range fearlessly. The cannons rumbled, and the bombs that fell from the sky from time to time could always wipe out a group of low-level ancient corpses in the dense group of ancient corpses. However, to the undead army that numbered close to 1 million, this level of casualties wasn't unacceptable. Of course, the most important thing was that the fearless ancient corpses didn't have any fear of casualties. Their red eyes flashed. Under Cthulhu's control, they maintained a neat formation and continued to advance toward the Gus Mountain range. 1 to 20 groups of giant dragons. Follow me. Douglas and Lewis, you two are in charge of confronting Rankster and holding him back. I will attract Cthulhu's attention. The giant dragons of each group will attack the ancient corpses on the ground and in the air according to their formation. After that, return immediately according to the original plan. The purple-striped griffin rose into the sky. Following Meg's command, 2,000 giant dragons were divided into 20 combat units under the leadership of Lewis and Douglas and flew toward the icy plains. Every group was led by a 10th-tier giant dragon. Moreover, these 20 groups of giant dragons were all carefully arranged. They were all above 7th tier and all had powerful long-range attacks. Of course, the most eye-catching thing was the huge explosive packs they were carrying on their backs. These were combat dragons and also explosive dragons. Meg led the team personally, and Irina sat behind him. Their main goal for this trip was to eliminate the aerial ghosts of the undead army. The death rate of the scouts sent into the icy plains these few days had been increasing rapidly because of the flying ancient corpses in the sky above the icy plains. The defense line at the Gus Mountain range was targeted at the undead army on the ground. It had limited defensive capabilities against the aerial ghosts. Therefore, Meg and Dominia's strategy after discussing was to go forward and find the target directly. Before the two armies' ground forces officially clashed, they would first eliminate the opponent's aerial forces and completely control the advantage in the sky. At this moment, there was a person sitting on each of Lewis and Douglas's backs. Hee, you fought giant dragons when you were young, and you can still ride giant dragons when you're old. Interesting. Crassus chuckled as he sat on the golden dragon's back and held his magic caster staff in his hand. Crassus, don't be so smug. If it weren't for Alex's orders, I wouldn't let you sit on my back. Lewis said angrily. He was a little aggrieved. Alex was worried that you couldn't defeat him, so he asked us to help. Crassus pursed his lips. Who said we couldn't defeat him? I wanted to have a good fight with him. Lewis was indignant. Compared to Lewis and Crassus, who were at loggerheads and looked like they would fight each other first, Douglas and Julian's side was much more harmonious. I heard that Rankster has already reached a higher level. It makes me curious what the ice element above level 10 is like, Douglas said. I have searched for decades and still found nothing. It does make me curious, Julian said in a hoarse voice. This was also the reason why he agreed to join forces with Douglas. It was difficult for him to enter the ice field, but with Douglas's help, he could directly fight with Rankster. This opportunity was very rare. With the speed of the giant dragons, they arrived at the 30 miles in no time. Not far away, a storm mixed with ice and snow swept over. The black mass of the undead army stretched on the ground. Even if they were flying high in the sky, they still couldn't see the end of it. This made the giant dragons secretly shocked. And those ancient corpses that were easily hundreds of meters tall exuded a terrifyingly powerful aura. It was even more powerful than they had expected. Cthulhu is right in front. Split up and go to the sides. After the attack, fly around to the sides and return. Don't fight, Meg ordered loudly. The formation of the giant dragons immediately split up and flew to the sides. Roar! A sharp roar sounded from the center of the undead army. Countless flying ancient corpses suddenly appeared in the sky and attacked the giant dragons crazily. The giant dragons were prepared. Under the leadership of the 10th tier giant dragons, they cooperated well. Ice and fireballs exploded in the air, and many domains locked onto the ancient corpses before killing them. Very quickly, the giant dragons disintegrated the attack of the flying ancient corpses and killed them all. The sky was cleared, and there were no longer any traces of the flying ancient corpses. After getting rid of the flying spirits, the giant dragons began to dive down, and many powerful attacks began to brew. Icicles that were several meters long began to form in the air. Flames and fireballs condensed in the mouth of the fire dragon, and a tornado formed behind the wind dragon. The giant dragons all showed their prowess and used their strongest long-range attacks, trying to achieve the greatest damage in one attack. At the same time, the ancient corpses on the ground had stopped in their tracks. Ice spears appeared in their hands as they looked up at the sky. The giant dragons were getting closer and closer to the ground. 1,000 meters, 800 meters, 500 meters, the ancient corpses raised their hands and threw out their ice spears. At the same time, the giant dragons also unleashed their skills. A fireball that was as hot as the sun was spat out from the giant dragons' mouths. It expanded at a speed visible to the naked eye, and when it landed in the middle of the undead army, it had already reached a diameter of more than 10 meters and exploded. All the ancient corpses within 500 meters were wiped out. Huge icicles fell from the sky with a terrifying impact. The ancient corpses within a few hundred meters were directly pinned to the ground and then smashed into powder. Hundreds of tornadoes rushed into the undead army, sweeping up countless ancient corpses. The green wind blades were like a meat grinder, cutting them into pieces. Of course, the most spectacular scene was the 2,000 explosive packs that were thrown into the group of ancient corpses and then exploded. The simultaneous attack of 2,000 high-tier giant dragons and the explosion of the explosive packs caused a large area of the undead army's dense and neat formation to be cleared. At least hundreds of thousands of low-tier ancient corpses were wiped out in this round of attack. However, the sharp ice spears that the ancient corpses threw out were like a rain of arrows that tore through the giant dragon's line of defense. Hundreds of giant dragons were hit by the spears and fell to the ground. Then, they were torn into pieces and eaten by the ancient corpses that swarmed over. The giant dragons rose into the sky again and then quickly pulled apart to the sides. They retreated far away without looking back. Irina raised her magic caster's staff and finished her chant. A beam of holy light tore through the snowstorm. Wherever it passed, the undead army was emptied. Finally, it landed on the 1,000-meter-tall skeletal dragon. Josh, who was standing on the skeletal dragon's head, opened his hand. A ball of dim light lit up from his palm, and the skeletal dragon's surface lit up with a dim light. The dim light and the holy light consumed each other in the confrontation. In the end, the dim light was exhausted. One of the skeletal dragon's wings was melted by the holy light, and the holy light also dissipated. On the other side, Meg looked at Cthulhu that was wriggling rapidly toward them. He also raised his hand and threw out the Tian-Du sword. At the same time, he got Az to retreat and increase the distance between them. Right at this moment, a silver figure flew over from the horizon and pounced toward the purple-striped griffin quickly. Your opponent is here, Rankster. A fireball exploded in front of the frost dragon and then turned into a fire phoenix that pounced on him. The frost dragon's body stopped, and he tilted his body to avoid the exploding fireball. He swung his tail at the charging fire phoenix, and the flamboyant fire phoenix was annihilated instantly. His power is indeed much stronger than before. I wonder if he gained this power because of his demonization. Crassus stood on Lewis's back and the magic caster staff in his hand trembled slightly with excitement. "Take it easy. Don't flip over. If you fall from here, you will really be eaten," Lewis reminded leisurely. On the other side, Douglas and Julian also appeared behind Rankster, and the pincer attack was already formed. The four top 10th-tier powerhouses of the Norland continent teamed up to deal with Rankster. It was evident how much they valued him. "Rankster, you're the king of frost. How can you be controlled by the devil? Wake up now." Douglas roared at Rankster, and his roar reverberated through heaven and earth. Rankster's blood-red eyes flickered a few times, and he seemed to be struggling. Right at this moment, a sharp, ear-piercing voice came from Cthulhu's body. Rankster's eyes turned red again, and he immediately turned to charge at Douglas. "He is already completely controlled. Don't hold back. Attack with all your might," Julian said in a low voice. He raised the magic wand in his hand, and a series of frost circles appeared in the space in front of Rankster. When the frost dragon passed through, the circles of frost suddenly tightened, and his speed was significantly reduced. After passing through 10 circles of frost, the frost dragon's body was already covered in a thick layer of frost, and his speed was reduced by half. "Here's our chance." Crassus' eyes lit up. He stomped on Lewis's head, and 2 spinning fireballs appeared under his feet at the same time. He charged at Rankster with his magic caster's staff raised high in the air, and the top of the staff glowed brightly. "This old man doesn't have any morals." Lewis glared, but his speed wasn't slow at all. There was a faint golden light shining in the air. "Extreme frost," Douglas also said coldly. Within a radius of 1,000 meters, the cold air solidified and covered the surroundings like a white fog. Chapter 2180. Rankster was very powerful. His power was far beyond that of a normal 10th-tier powerhouse. However, the 4 old men who didn't care about martial ethics were also very powerful. Hence, the scene turned into a chaotic brawl. Crassus stepped on the wind-fire wheels and hammered the frost dragon's head with his magic caster's staff. Julian tapped his magic wand lightly, and the circle of rapid freeze tightened, freezing the frost dragon into a popsicle. The golden dragon, Lewis, shone with golden light. His scales flew everywhere as he engaged in close combat. Douglas, on the other hand, opened his frost domain to counteract Rankster's frost domain. Rankster charged left and right, but he was beaten until he couldn't fight back at all. Meg glanced at him from the corner of his eye, and his eyelids twitched. Old men who didn't care about martial ethics were really scary. Of course, a young man shouldn't be too arrogant. He had to take care of himself. After successfully angering Cthulhu and attracting its attention, Meg retreated as he fought, allowing Oz-Z to keep a safe distance from it. At the same time, Irina turned into a laser gun, and the holy light swept around, harvesting the undead creatures one by one. She really wiped them out. "Don't fight. Retreat," Meg transmitted to Crassus and the rest. He raised his hand to keep the Tion-Du sword and told Oz-Z to retreat faster. "Let's go," Lewis roared and turned back with Crassus on his back. Although the 4 of them had successfully suppressed Rankster, they weren't confident that they could kill or trap it in a short time. Julian raised his hand to set up an ice wall, and Douglas also carried him to retreat. They had achieved their goal of escorting the undead, and successfully retreating meant that they had completed their mission. Cthulhu's charging body slowly stopped. It looked at the purple-striped griffin disappearing into the sky and roared indignantly. However, it wasn't in a hurry to chase after it. Rankster circled in the sky and also gave up on the chase. "What a pity." Meg turned to look, and a hint of pity appeared in his eyes. A powerful and cautious opponent was the most troublesome. The purple-striped griffin landed on the Gus Mountain Range. The 20 teams of giant dragons had all returned and landed to rest. The giant dragon team achieved great results with minimal losses, killing hundreds of thousands of skeletons. The 2 main cannons had finished firing and had stopped. However, from time to time, explosions could still be heard in the icy plains. The tremors were especially obvious. Get the artillery battalion to prepare. Wait for the signal. Dragons, rest for a while and prepare for the next round of attack. Orders were passed down one after another. Meg narrowed his eyes and looked in the direction of the ice plains, his expression exceptionally solemn. Even if they were as strong as dragons, they would still be insignificant in such a large-scale war and would be killed all the same. He was unable to ensure that the Allied forces suffered zero casualties, but he still hoped to minimize the losses to the greatest extent. The dragons' aerial attack caused the undead army to slow down slightly, but they quickly regrouped and continued to advance. Moreover, compared to the previous gathering state, the distance between each other had clearly increased. Very quickly, red flames lit up in the icy plains once again, crossing from east to west. Almost everyone on the 100-mile battle line could see the signal light up. This was the signal that the undead army had entered the attack range of the cannons. Fire! Thousands of cannons on Gus Mountain Range opened fire at the same time. The roar shook the entire mountain range. All troops attacked. At the same time, in the sky, the tyrant dragon tribe leader Isaiah roared. 8,000 dragons rushed out, carrying bags of explosives and flying toward the icy plains under the cover of the dense cannons. Very quickly, countless flames lit up in the icy plains. The dense explosions sounded like firecrackers in the icy plains. The tremors on the ground were so real and dense. The improved cannons had a range of 15 kilometers. The vast icy plains fell into a full-scale bombardment. 8,000 dragons flew into the icy plains, dropping the ignited bags of explosives 1,000 meters in the air before quickly returning. Hundreds of thousands of kilograms of explosives were simple, but their power was shocking. 8,000 explosives landed on the ground and exploded, turning countless skeleton soldiers into powder. The furious Cthulhu flapped its wings, causing hundreds of dragons that could not dodge in time to fall from the sky and be devoured by the crazy ancient corpses on the ground. However, most of the dragons were able to return safely, returning to the defensive line behind the Gus Mountain Range to resupply. This round of large-scale bombardment once again took away more than 100,000 undead army. Before the million-strong undead army reached the defensive line at the Gus Mountain Range, they had already lost close to 300,000. This result made the Allied army very excited. Alex is really a genius. He completely overturned the mode of war. Lewis landed and could not help but praise. Douglas and Isaiah nodded in agreement. First, they used the absolute advantage of the combination of the dragons to snipe the enemy's air forces, then used the cannon's long-range coverage as a cover, and used their own air forces to drop the explosives. They killed the most enemies at the lowest price. Before the official battle, they had already depleted 30% of the enemy's combat power. Even they, who had experienced the racial war, had never heard of such a mode of war. The colossal dragon race dominated the sky. However, during the race wars, the various races mostly fought for themselves and relied on their absolute strength to suppress the other races. In today's battle, every dragon was more like a tool of the whole, moving as one. Just like the second round of attack, even the 10th-tier powerhouses, apart from the pilot, only carried the explosives and dropped them when they reached the designated location. Even so, this seemingly simple operation still managed to achieve an extremely beautiful result. More importantly, apart from the unlucky encounter with Cthulhu's hundreds of dragons, the dragons' losses were extremely limited. Dominic, who was sitting in the command room, nodded as he listened to the continuous reports of the battle situation. He admired Alex even more in his heart. He did not expect that after 3 years, Alex, who was away from the army, had a far better understanding of war than he had imagined. It's a pity that the enemy is the undead army. Dominic sighed softly. The undead army controlled by Cthulhu did not know fear and was fearless. If it was a regular army, no matter which race they were from, losing 30% of their combat power before the official battle was undoubtedly a fatal blow to the army's morale. It could even be said that the enemy had already lost before the battle officially started. In the spaceship, Vicky's mouth was agape as she looked at the desolate ice field below in disbelief. The image of the 8,000 giant dragons flying over and tossing down the explosives still lingered in her mind. Shocking. That was a scene that subverted her imagination. There were no advanced bombers or warships, nor were there powerful and exquisite cannonballs. However, that commander had used 8,000 dragons to present a shocking bombing. Even the first fleet of the Ancient Ones did not have 8,000 warships. Chapter 2181. She's eyes were also shining brightly. Alex's arrangement was also beyond her expectations. Her original plan was to coordinate with the two main cannons to provide some firepower support to the Allied forces and kill as many undead creatures as possible. However, Alex showed her a stunning battle plan, especially the use of giant dragons to drop explosives. It was already the prototype of a bomber. Is this guy really that smart? Or does he not belong to this place? She thought to herself as she grew more curious about Alex. The undead army quickly gathered and continued to march towards the Gus Mountain range. Alex, you sly fellow. When I catch you, I will let you know what pain is. On the bone dragon's back, Josh's expression was ferocious, but he was not worried about the exhaustion of the undead army at all. No one knew the situation of the various races on the Norland continent better than him. In just a few days, the various races had not even finished their wrangling. It was impossible for them to form an effective defense. However, he did not expect that this group of giant dragons would be willing to be used by Alex. It was a little out of his expectations. However, that was all. Those seemingly lively cannons were not very powerful. They could only kill some cannon fodder and ancient corpses. They did not come from the Ancient Ones. Those pedantic and cowardly fellows should be hiding underground now. When they regained control of the Norland continent, our Ela city would open up a passage to the underground city. They would definitely massacre the Ancient Ones and take revenge for the past. The undead army was just a tool. He would not feel the pinch no matter how many of them died. What he wanted was to kill more living beings to obtain more blood and resentment, so that he could become more powerful. The so-called levels of those natives were meaningless to him. As long as he had enough blood and food, he could become stronger without limit until he had a body that could not be killed like Cthulhu. Before coming to the Norland continent, Cthulhu had devoured all the resources from dozens of planets with life. That was how he managed to cultivate an unkillable body. How would the ignorant natives know what kind of existence they were facing? Cthulhu let out a low roar. The skeleton army glowed red, and their speed increased again as they continued to dash forward. He could feel the abundant vitality in front of him. That was such a tempting existence. After being trapped for countless years, he was already unable to endure the hunger and thirst. In the distance, a mountain range appeared in their line of sight. At the same time, the soldiers of the Alliance above the Gus Mountain range also saw the undead army that appeared on the ice field 35 to 5,000 meters away. The cannons that had stopped firing rang out once again. The dense cannon fire landed on the area where the skeleton core was most concentrated. This time, the cannon fire was even more accurate and concentrated. The magicians had already finished chanting their high-level spells. Countless spells lit up the sky, making it look like a dream. Huge meteors with red tails fell from the sky like heavenly fire. The ground collapsed as rock giants broke out of the ice and rushed into the group of skeletons. Lightning split the sky and earth and turned the high-level skeletons into ashes. The combination of the cannons and the magic legion unleashed terrifying power in the mid-long distance. The archers gripped their longbows tightly and knocked their mahogany arrows. They looked on with excitement. It was hard to imagine that a war could be fought like this. No one had ever seen tens of thousands of mages from different races casting spells at the same time. The chaotic, magical elements in the air seemed like they would explode at any moment. Joshua had never seen it before either. He had not seen it for at least tens of thousands of years. Hence, when he saw the magic lights that lit up on the mountain range and turned into terrifying spells when they landed beside him. His expression finally changed. The mountain range was filled with people. They came from different races, but they were intertwined in a chaotic manner as they released the cannons that spat out tongues of fire and cast all kinds of spells. The undead army was like a live target on the empty ice field. Their numbers were decreasing at a speed visible to the naked eye. How was that possible? They've teamed up, Joshua screamed. One had to know that under the leadership of the Ancient Ones, the various races of the Norland continent spent a total of 3 years to conquer almost the entire continent. They only managed to form an alliance when they were forced into a desperate situation. If they were given more time, the Ancient Ones would not exist anymore, and the Norland continent would become their prey. Now that the Norland continent was weak, the so-called powerhouses of the various races could not withstand a single blow, so he did not choose to awaken the other conquerors. He planned to control the entire continent alone, absorb the origin of the continent, and then devour the other conquerors. Everything was going according to plan, but he did not expect the alliance of the various races to be waiting here before he even left the ice field. Cthulhu lowered his head and growled at Joshua. "This is the plan you were talking about? Shut up. I'm your brain. Do you think you can come up with a better plan?" Josh roared with a cold expression. "It doesn't matter. Schemes are the tricks of the weak. To us, conquering everything depends on absolute power." A cold smile appeared on Joshua's face. "The more people who die, the stronger we will be. It is the same no matter who dies." Cthulhu flapped his wings, and bits of black smoke floated out of the ancient corpses and disappeared into Cthulhu's body. The stronger the ant, the more delicious it is. I'm already starting to get excited. Cthulhu's body trembled slightly, and he let out a sharp roar. The undead army charged fearlessly towards the Gus mountain range. Magic exploded among the ancient corpses. Some of them died, but it did not affect the undead army's charge at all. Those pairs of blood-red eyes swayed in the ice field. Those ancient corpses that existed in the ancient times were exceptionally ferocious. The distance between both parties was closing rapidly. 2,000 meters. 1,500 meters. 1,000 meters. Magic spells were as bright as fireworks. The catapults had already started to release huge packs of explosives, and the strongmen had also started to throw large packs of explosives to the front line. "Archers, get ready. Release the arrows." More than 300,000 soldiers from the Roth Empire were deployed on the 50-mile front line. Everyone had a crossbow, and they used up the 10 mahogany arrows in the quiver in an extremely short period of time. 3 million arrows turned into a black rain of arrows. The mahogany arrows were smeared with red cinnabar, and they fell on the undead army that was charging crazily on the ground. The seemingly weak mahogany arrows landed on the ancient corpses that had not melted for thousands of years. The sturdy skulls were pierced through instantly. The cinnabar was burning, and so were the mahogany arrows. Then, the undead army was set ablaze. 3 million crossbow bolts instantly created a vacuum in the charging undead army. Tens of thousands of ancient corpses turned into ashes, and nothing was left. Only the ancient corpses that were above the 7th tier could continue to charge forward under the rain of arrows. They were alone. The archers from the various races also started to shoot. They were not stingy with the mahogany arrows that they had prepared in their quiver at the ancient corpses that had entered their range. The ancient corpses fell one by one. The magical combination of mahogany and cinnabar gave the ancient corpses, which were originally difficult to deal with, a fatal weakness. Chapter 2182. The vanguard of the undead army had already reached Dagger's defensive line. The fastest ancient corpses were less than 500 meters away from the front line. The spell formation at the front line lit up to obstruct the undead army's advance. The magic casters and sharpshooters started to shoot the ancient corpses that were above the 7th tier. At the same time, thousands of giant dragons rose into the sky again. Under the cover of the rain of arrows, They attacked the undead army again. They even consciously avoided Cthulhu, who had stopped over 10 kilometers away. How was that possible? How can those fellows' arrows be so powerful? Josh stared at the undead army that was falling under the rain of arrows with disbelief. The ancient corpses were still extremely tough, even though it was due to the extreme cold of the ice field. The Roth Empire's military's crossbows could not even penetrate the low-tier ancient corpses at a long distance. However, the rain of arrows was killing the undead army at a crazy rate. Even some 7th-tier ancient corpses fell after being shot. The damage was far greater than the cannons. The natives of the Norland continent were killing the undead army in the simplest and most effective way. Since the start of the attack, the undead army of 1,000,000 had been reduced by more than half in a short time. Right now, the undead army was not even able to fight the allied army in a real sense. The ancient corpses were best at close combat, but they were not even effective at all. What kind of weapon is that? She looked at the ancient corpses that fell under the rain of arrows with a shocked expression. The Norland continent's technology level was very low. The cannons were already out of her expectations. However, how could the arrows with limited power cause such great damage to the ancient corpses? She had also conducted rigorous experiments on these ancient corpses before. Compared to living creatures, these ancient corpses that did not feel pain and fear had stronger defensive abilities. Even if their limbs were broken, they could still drag their broken bodies forward. They were very difficult to deal with. Could it be that they have carved a spell formation? She frowned. However, she quickly dismissed the idea, setting aside the fact that it was extremely difficult to inscribe spell formations onto these tiny ballistae. Just the consecutive volleys from before had already amounted to over 10 million ballistae. Even if all of the magic casters on the Norland continent worked themselves to death, they still wouldn't be able to inscribe so many spell formations in such a short time. At the same time, the undead army began to throw out their ice spears. However, the cliff, which was hundreds of meters high, became the natural wall of the Alliance army, together with the fortifications that were built in advance. Although the ice spears caused some damage to the Alliance army, their lethality was limited. However, the undead army's madness was on full display at this moment. They braved the rain of arrows and falling boulders and started climbing the cliff. The 100-meter-deep ravine was filled up by the fallen ancient corpses. However, the glutinous rice that was laid out at the bottom of the cliff indeed displayed its suppressive effect on the low-level ancient corpses. After the ancient corpses that were not afraid of death encountered the glutinous rice, they actually revealed expressions of fear. At the same time, the undead army finally found a breakthrough. The defenses of the 3 canyons were broken, and the undead army swarmed in. It was as if a flood that had been blocked by a dam had suddenly found a spillway. However, this was not a flood channel, but a real meat grinder. The ancient corpses rushed into the canyon, and countless killing arrays set up by the array masters lit up, frantically killing the densely packed ancient corpses. The 2 sides of the canyon were filled with allied forces. Arrows, spells, and boulders rained down from the sky. There was no lack of level 10 experts among them. They were specifically targeting high-grade ancient corpses to kill. "It's climbing up from here," someone exclaimed. A 5-meter-tall ancient corpse withstood dozens of peachwood arrows and jumped up the battlefield. It kicked a cannon and a few artillery soldiers down the cliff, then rushed into the group of archers to kill. This was a level 8 ancient corpse. Its strength was far above most of the allied forces. It was as if it had entered an unstoppable state. However, the allied forces' formation was not messed up because of this. The archers changed targets and aimed their crossbows at the ancient corpse. At the same time, there were warriors who came to support in this direction. At the forefront was a knight holding a sapphire longsword. He had a square face and a determined expression. The longsword that was dyed red by cinnabar lit up with a golden light. He leaped up and slashed down with his sword. The ancient corpse leaned to the side to avoid being hit in the vitals. The sword slashed its shoulder. The cinnabar on the longsword flashed red, and the sword cut off its entire left arm. The crazy ancient corpse waved its right arm, and its sharp claws also cut off the knight's right arm. Blood splattered everywhere. The fallen right arm was still holding the sapphire longsword. At the same time, an elf at the back pierced a peachwood spear into the ancient corpse's head. The spear pierced through and nailed to the ground. The ancient corpse slowly fell to the ground and turned into a pile of black ashes. Medic, there's an injured person here. Soon, a medic arrived and bandaged Connie's wound. Connie looked at the severed arm on the ground in a daze, his face pale. The medic helped Connie up and said loudly, "Go to the back. No, I can still fight." Connie shook off the medic's hand and bent down to pick up his sword with his left hand. The medic looked at him with a complicated expression, but did not persuade him. He turned and ran to the next injured person. Ancient corpses kept breaking through the line of defense. The battle on the city wall began to heat up. The undead army that rushed into the canyon quickly lost members under the pincer attack of the Allied forces. However, because there were too many of them, there were still some that escaped and rushed toward the entrance of the canyon. They're here. At the entrance of the canyon, countless Allied forces had been waiting for a long time. Sargeras tore off his clothes, and red lava began to flow on his body. The burning legion followed suit. Flames rose from their bodies, distorting the cold air. The forest trolls had already climbed up the cliff. Their roots dug into the stone wall, locking their bodies firmly onto the cliff. Their vines extended forward, crisscrossing the several hundred-meter-wide canyon like a spiderweb. Dozens of ancient corpses appeared in their sight. They were all powerful ancient corpses that were more than 5 meters tall. Their bodies were covered in wounds, but their auras were still shocking. Behind them, more and more ancient corpses appeared and rushed toward the entrance of the canyon. The most concentrated killing array at the entrance of the canyon lit up. The ancient corpses that rushed into the array were instantly cut into countless pieces. Vines broke out of the ground and immediately bound the ancient corpses' legs. The best archers of the Allied forces were almost all gathered at the two sides of the canyon. Archers of grade 8 and grade 9, equipped with magic runes and mahogany arrows, could kill high-grade ancient corpses. However, there were too many ancient corpses. They rushed through the array, broke the vines, and collided with the Allied forces that were guarding the entrance of the canyon. The most tragic battle of the war had just officially begun. They had no way out. They could only wait for their comrades to replace them. The order they received was to defend to the death. Anyone could die, but not a single ancient corpse could leave the canyon. Chapter 2183. No matter how much preparation they had made in advance, the clash between the million-strong army was still more tragic than expected. Meg sat on the griffin's back and looked at Cthulhu, who was standing between heaven and earth with a grave expression. The holy light pierced through the canyon, and the entire canyon was emptied. Irina raised her magic caster staff with a pale face and softly said, "He's not moving." "What do we do?" "We're not moving either," Meg said calmly. The Allied army's casualties were increasing rapidly, and there were even a few lines of defense that had fallen into an intense battle. However, Meg still didn't make a move. He only had one target, Cthulhu. This war would only truly end when Cthulhu was suppressed. Otherwise, even if the million-strong undead army was completely wiped out, other terrifying threats would appear soon. A loud and clear dragon roar rang out from the horizon, and a frost dragon charged into the group of dragons. It was as if it had entered an uninhabited land, throwing the formation of the dragons into chaos. There were also over 10 dragons that were frozen and fell to the ground. A single breath of frost dragon breath turned several hundred Allied army soldiers on the 100-meter battle line into ice sculptures. When the wind blew, the ice sculptures shattered into pieces. "It's here!" Lewis and Douglas rose into the sky at the same time, carrying Crassus and Julian towards the frost dragon. Lewis and Douglas stepped forward, and all the giant dragons retreated. The group of people started fighting again, and it was especially intense. "Father," Elizabeth, who was standing in front of the tent, rushed forward and looked at the frost dragon in the sky that was riddled with injuries. Tears were already rolling down her cheeks uncontrollably. She finally saw the father that she had been missing day and night after so many years. The father who taught her how to fly and how to get up on her own when she fell was still as majestic as ever. However, looking at his bloodshot eyes and his crazy behavior of attacking his tribesmen, he had obviously lost his mind. Elizabeth was devastated. She couldn't believe that her proud father would become the devil's puppet. Meg looked down at Elizabeth and sighed in his heart. In Alex's memory, Rankster was a worthy opponent. He was strong, confident, and never gave up. Who would have thought that such a prideful person would become a puppet of the devil, unable to control his own body? Now that Crassus, Julian, Lewis, and Douglas had trapped Rankster, he could focus on dealing with Cthulhu. Cthulhu, who had not moved for a long time, finally moved. Its speed was not fast, and it was somewhat erratic, making it impossible to see what it was trying to do. Meg remained calm. This time, it was his turn to remain motionless. Our Ela should have surfaced by now. We need to clear a path and head south to meet up with them, Cthulhu said in a low voice. For the first time, his voice was filled with urgency. The million-strong army of the undead was like moths to a flame. They were unable to break through the defense line formed by the allied forces of the various races. Seeing their numbers dwindle, they could no longer sit still. Josh's expression also turned ugly with jealousy. It was as if Alex had set up a trap for them to step into. They were now in a dilemma. There were probably no less than 1 million allied forces in the Gus Mountain range, and there were at least 7,000 to 8,000 dragons. The scale of the allied forces was completely out of his expectations. Rankster was already entangled and could not get away. They could only break the stalemate with their own hands. Seems like Alex has become their backbone. We have to kill him to break their morale, Josh said in a low voice. He then frowned and said, "This fellow is cunning. I'm afraid he has already set up a spell formation and is just waiting for us to take the bait." "It's just a spell formation. What's there to be afraid of? They have rebuilt the spell formation outside Chaos City and trapped me again," Josh said with a cold expression. If Alex had not attracted the lightning tribulation, they would have already fused. Who could trap him in this vast world? Building a spell formation on this vast, icy plain. Could it be that he knows where we will appear? I think he is just bluffing. He wants to scare us off by standing there, so that he can deal with the undead army and join forces to deal with us, Cthulhu said. Josh was deep in thought, but he could not make up his mind. If they did not make a move, the million-strong undead army that they had painstakingly gathered would be exhausted. Even if our Ela surfaced and all the blessed tribes came out, they would still be suppressed. He looked at Alex, sitting on the griffin's back, and Irina behind him, and a sense of viciousness surged in his heart. He coldly said, "Who cares if he is scheming? We can just kill him. We will charge over head-on. The bone dragon will take the lead, and you will follow behind. I want to see where he is hiding his spell formation and when he will release it." The 1,000-meter tall bone dragon began to sprint towards Alex in the middle. Its huge dragon claws would flatten 10 odd, miserable ancient corpses with every step it took. Josh appeared on top of Cthulhu's head. Cthulhu flapped its wings gently, and its body floated 100 meters in the air. Its 3,000-meter tall body flew towards the Gus Mountain range like a mountain, and its spread wings covered the sky. The Allied forces on the Gus Mountain range were all shocked when they saw that. Although they had long heard of how terrifying the devil was, they still felt extremely uncomfortable when they saw the indescribable thing that was as terrifying as a mountain. Even putting aside the gigantic Cthulhu, the 1,000-meter-long bone dragon that was dashing towards them was still terrifying. In terms of size, it was even taller than most of the defensive line in the Gus Mountain range. If such a huge creature broke through the defensive line, it would immediately create a huge gap. Who could stop it? Everyone's eyes fell on the man sitting on the griffin's back. "Master, when do we activate the spell formation?" Barbara stood behind Jonas and stared at the bone dragon and the flying Cthulhu. She was both excited and nervous. "Wait." Jonas only said one word, and his eyes were fixed on the icy plain. As Cthulhu pounced towards the Gus Mountain range, the ferocious skeleton army became even more frenzied. The end of the canyon had become a purgatory. The ancient corpses and the corpses of the Allied forces piled up on the ground were already several meters high. The legs of the forest trolls were still on the cliff, but their bodies were nowhere to be seen. The corpses of the warriors from various races were piled up like a mountain. The medics couldn't even bring the injured out of the battlefield. A crazy ancient lizard corpse stumbled over. It swung its broken tail and instantly smashed a knight into meat paste. It opened its mouth and bit off the head of a demon. A spear pierced from behind and nailed it to the cliff. An ancient demon corpse with a body full of arrows charged over. It condensed an ice spear in its hand and threw it at the crowd. It flew towards Mond, who was holding a large saber and was in a frenzy. "Be careful!" Sargeras, who was covered in blood, pounced forward and sent Mond flying. That ice spear instantly pierced through Sargeras' chest and nailed him to the stone wall. "Boss!" Mond rolled on the ground. When he looked back, his expression changed drastically. "Idiot, look in front." Keel pulled him to the side, and another ice spear landed where he was sitting in front of him. Before he could turn back, the two of them fell into a battle to the death again. There were more and more crazy ancient corpses, and they almost filled up the tunnel. Sargeras, who was almost exhausted, couldn't break free from the ice spear. He leaned against the cliff. Blood flowed quickly from his back, and his eyes started to blur. Suddenly, something fell from the melted pocket at his waist into his hand. It was a small ring. Sargeras smiled as if he could see little Boss' cute and innocent smiling face again. It was a pity that he didn't have the chance to be late for Mr. Max Rigiamo anymore. Suddenly, a ray of light lit up, and ice and fire lotuses flew out of the ring. They slowly rose into the air, and then flew towards the ancient corpses that were charging over from the canyon. Chapter 2184. Hundreds and thousands of ice and fire lotuses flew into the canyon. The crystal-clear ice lotuses had red flames in them. They formed a line and turned into a ribbon that floated into the canyon before exploding. The extreme frost and the condensed flames fused instantly and then exploded with a shocking power. The flames that intertwined with ice and fire instantly turned all the ancient corpses in the 100-meter tunnel into ashes. The tunnel in front of them actually became empty instantly. Sargeras' eyes lit up, and a smile appeared on his lips. So this was the present that little Boss gave him. His eyelids started to get heavy, and he closed them slowly. Before he fainted, he seemed to have heard Mond's voice. "Boss! Medic! Medic! Medic!" Meg lowered his head and nodded slightly at Jonas below. He held his sword with both hands and looked at the 1,000-meter long bone dragon that was charging towards him. The white bones that had experienced the passage of time had gathered to form this kind of indomitable bone dragon. Its aura far surpassed that of ordinary ancient corpses. Every step it took left a deep hole in the ice as it charged straight at him. It was only a short distance of tens of kilometers, and it arrived in front of him in the blink of an eye. Meanwhile, that mountain-like Cthulhu was following behind. Its target was also him. Do we need to join forces to help him? Helena asked in front of the command center as she cast a spell to kill a few giant ancient corpses. The other 10th-tier powerhouses also looked at Dominic. As the deputy commander of the Allied army, he was the one who understood Alex's thoughts the best. Alex was undoubtedly the backbone of the Allied army now. If something happened to him, the Allied army's morale would definitely be affected. Moreover, once Cthulhu broke through Gus' defense line and headed south, no one would be able to stop it. Dominic shook his head and said, "Alex has given the order. We only need to guard the defense line. Leave Cthulhu to her." He looked up at Meg with trust in his eyes. Although they came up with the battle plan together, he was the only one who knew that whether it was the arrangement before the giant dragons were split into groups or the use of the 3 canyons to split up, it was all Meg's idea. If nothing went wrong, They already had a huge chance of winning this battle. The biggest variable was Cthulhu. Their experience outside Chaos City told them that devils could not be killed. They could only be sealed again. However, apart from Alex and Jonas, even Dominic did not know where the spell formation was set up. All the 10th tier powerhouses from the various races were arranged at various parts of the battlefront. There were only 3 10th tier powerhouses near the command center now. Alex didn't order them to help. Everyone was nervous, but they couldn't help but look forward to it. Josh glared coldly at Mag and Irina on the griffin's back, and flames of fury burned in his eyes again. Although he had control, his obsession with Cthulhu was still not gone. Of course, as long as he killed this pair of bastards, everything would be resolved. Capture him. I want his body. Josh suddenly changed his mind as he looked at Mag. There was no other body as perfect as this one on the Norland continent. Once the seal was broken, Cthulhu's head and body would become one, and he would be able to exist in another body. As you wish. Cthulhu's deep voice sounded. Go. Bring him back to me. Josh reached out his right hand toward the bone dragon. A black stone statue exploded in his hand and turned into a black light that entered the bone dragon's head. The black light quickly spread across the bone dragon's body and turned into a black armor that covered its entire body. Even its head was covered by a black helmet that was covered with spikes. The bone dragon's aura increased tremendously, and its speed increased as it charged toward the Gus mountain range. The ground shook violently, and even the archers were affected. The allied army facing the bone dragon had a drastic change of expression, but no one retreated. The cannons fired at the bone dragon, and tens of thousands of arrows covered it. However, the black armor glowed and easily neutralized the cannons and arrows. Everyone's attacks could not hurt it at all. Magic armor. I will take care of it. Irina raised her magic caster staff and began to chant a spell. No need. Meg took a step forward and leaped 100 meters high. He held the Tian-Du sword with both hands and slashed down at the bone dragon's head. Lightning flashed, and the sword's aura spanned hundreds of meters. The long sword fell. The indestructible helmet cracked, and so did the bone dragon's ferocious head. From top to bottom, the bone dragon was sliced in half. The bone dragon, which was formed from countless bones, instantly shattered into bone fragments. Alex, give me your life. A cold voice was heard. The space distorted, and Cthulhu, who was thousands of meters away, appeared in front of Meg. A terrifying shadow shrouded him, and black demon chi surged and surrounded him. Meg's surroundings suddenly became like a swamp. Holy light cleansed this darkness and filth. At that moment, the shadow of a tree of life appeared behind Irina, and a steady stream of life force was injected into the magic caster's staff. A beam of dazzling holy light tore through the black fog and illuminated Meg and the ground beneath his feet. Meg looked up at Cthulhu, who was squirming in front of him, and revealed a bright smile. The glacier shattered, and golden light shone brightly. A giant seal formation with a radius of thousands of meters rose from under the ice. The golden seal was like an inverted bowl, and Cthulhu was trapped in the bowl. You tricked me, Josh roared in exasperation. Cthulhu was equally shocked. Its huge body slammed forward, but it was bounced back by the golden seal. Kill him. Josh looked coldly at Meg, who was as tiny as an ant on the ground. Cthulhu's huge body turned to crush Meg, and the dense black demon chi swept over again. Bye-bye. Meg chuckled. Golden light flashed under his feet, and a teleportation formation lit up. Before the black demon chi surged over, he disappeared into the seal. Cthulhu missed its target and was blocked by the array formation. The golden light wall stood firm and indestructible. On the other side, Meg had already appeared in front of the command center. Perfect. Meg looked at Jonas and said with a smile. Jonas gasped for air and had to support himself against the wall to prevent himself from falling to the ground. He looked at Meg with admiration. Although Meg using himself as bait was all part of their plan, they were facing Cthulhu, If there was a slight accident during the execution, the outcome would be predictable. Meg's terrifying execution and his tacit cooperation with Irina shocked him even more. After slaying the bone dragon with one sword, it smoothly landed in the center of the preset teleportation formation. Irina used the holy light technique to tear apart the black demon Chi and eliminate any possible interference from Cthulhu on the teleportation formation. Only then could it cooperate with the seal formation to activate the teleportation formation and teleport Meg back. Chapter 2185. In front of the command center, Dominic, Helena, and the others watched this scene with their mouths agape. They were ready to make a move when they saw that Alex was on the verge of death. However, they did not expect the situation to suddenly turn around. The seal formation lit up 100 meters below the glacier and trapped Cthulhu. Alex even teleported back to the command center and scathed through the teleportation portal. Everyone only came back to their senses when they saw Cthulhu crazily hitting the seal. It turned out that this war had been part of Alex's plan all along. Everyone looked at Alex with admiration and deep reverence. The younger generation would surpass them in time. Even Cthulhu, who had existed for countless years, fell into his trap. The Alliance army on the Gus Mountain Range also came back to their senses and realized what had happened. Cheers erupted from the 100-mile battle line. Their morale soared as they frantically suppressed the leaderless ancient corpses. He caught it just like that. In the battleship, she stopped pressing the launch button of the electromagnetic cannon and looked at Cthulhu, who was trapped in the seal. She could not hide the shock on her face. Before this war began, she knew very well that Meg's target was Cthulhu. It could be said that the battle between him and Cthulhu would directly determine the outcome of this war. However, she did not expect Meg to use such a clever method to trick Cthulhu into the formation and let himself escape unscathed. This guy seems a little stupid. It was sealed just like that. Vicky widened her eyes in disbelief. She was even prepared to pilot the mech and land to help Alex. She did not expect Cthulhu to be sealed in the formation before it could even make a move. It's not stupid. It's too smart. She shook her head and stared at the man with a calm smile on the screen. The entire process seemed simple, but it was filled with countless hidden dangers. Strength, courage, and wisdom were all indispensable. In other words, luck played a huge role as well. However, luck was also a part of strength. This man was becoming more and more incomprehensible to her. However, Cthulhu being sealed meant that this war had come to an end. "Let's pull in the net," Meg said to Jonas. "All right." Jonas nodded and sat cross-legged on the ground. He held his magic caster's staff in front of him and weaved a series of complicated runes into the seal formation. Countless complex inscriptions appeared on the cage-like seal formation. Golden light shone brightly, and it began to shrink rapidly. The black demon Chi quickly dissipated in the golden light. Under the suppression of the formation, Cthulhu's gigantic body that was thousands of meters tall rapidly shrank until it was less than 100 meters tall. The shrinking ceiling formation became even more solid. Like a golden bell, it locked onto Cthulhu's body and immobilized him. Joshua's body had already exploded during the compression of the formation. A wisp of black gas flew out of his body and entered Cthulhu's body. Furthermore, there was an endless stream of golden runes that landed on Cthulhu's body, rapidly diluting its magic power until it finally disappeared. At this moment, the red light in the eyes of the crazy, undead army disappeared. Like a collective crash, the ancient corpses that were still charging forward and biting suddenly fell to the ground. Then, they quickly blackened and decomposed, turning into black powder that drifted away with the wind. The battlefield suddenly quieted down. It took a while for the Allied soldiers to regain their senses. Then, their cheers resounded throughout the Gus Mountain Range. "We won. We held on." They hugged their comrades who had fought side by side, laughing and crying. Elves and demons hugged each other. Orcs and knights hugged each other and cried. At this moment, they had already transcended the barriers and hatred between the races. facing the million-strong undead army. Those who had not experienced it would find it hard to imagine what kind of fear they had overcome to hand their lives over to the other party and fight side by side here. We won. We won. Keel, whose face was covered in blood, could not care less about the bone-deep wound on his leg. He staggered as he turned around and shouted in the crowd, "Boss! Boss, we won!" He pulled a lava demon out of the pile of corpses with great difficulty. Then, he could not help but burst into tears. Sanair! Sanair, we won! At the end of the 3 canyons was the most tragic battlefield. After cheering, they began to search for their friends and loved ones among the piles of corpses. The skeleton army dissipated as Cthulhu was sealed. The giant dragons that had lost their target circled in the air before landing on the ground. However, there was still a battle in the sky that had not ended. The red glow in Rankster's eyes began to weaken, but he still did not get out of his demonic state. Julian lowered his head to look at Cthulhu, who was sealed on the ground, and said in a hoarse voice, "Cthulhu has been sealed. We can hold back and capture him. Let's see if there's any other way." "That's reasonable." Crassus nodded. He retracted his magic caster's staff, and it landed on Lewis's body again. Lewis and Douglas also held back their attacks. However, at this moment, Rankster suddenly attacked crazily. He broke free from the 4's encirclement and tried to leave. "Rankster, Cthulhu has been sealed. Where do you want to go?" A purple figure appeared in front of Rankster. A long sword was in the air, blocking his path. The loud roar was even more deafening. With his path blocked, Rankster was attacked from 3 sides. He let out an angry roar and tried to break free. However, he could not break free, and a few more injuries appeared on his body. "Father." Elizabeth looked at this scene and ignored her injuries. She transformed into a frost dragon and flew into the sky shakily. Meg frowned as he looked at Rankster. Although the red in his eyes had faded a lot, he was still in a crazed state. He thought that after Cthulhu was sealed, he would regain his clarity of mind. It seemed like his condition was more serious than expected. "Seems like we have to seal him first," Meg said in a low voice. Rankster was too crazy in this state. If he escaped, it would be difficult to catch him again. Rankster seemed to feel the threat too. He attacked crazily, trying to break free from the encirclement. "Father, Father." At this moment, a sorrowful voice sounded. Elizabeth flew to the outside and looked at Rankster sadly. "Father, I am Elizabeth. I am your daughter. Wake up, wake up." Rankster's body suddenly froze. He turned around to look at Elizabeth. "Why, Lee, Sha, bye." A low voice came out of his mouth. His red eyes also became clearer. Then he suddenly let out a sharp roar, and his huge body fell straight to the ground. Everyone was a little taken aback when they saw this scene. Only Elizabeth followed and flew down. She tried to use her injured wings to hold Rankster back, but she was pressed heavily to the ground. Chapter 2186. Irina dragged Elizabeth out from under the frost dragon. "Don't kill him. He still recognizes me. He's not a devil." Elizabeth couldn't care less about her injuries. She opened her arms in front of Rankster, who was covered in wounds, and said earnestly to Meg, "Don't kill him. He still recognizes me. He's not a devil." Her body was trembling. She was afraid that they would kill her father. Douglas looked at Elizabeth and then at Meg. He wanted to say something, but he didn't. Lewis frowned and didn't say anything either. Rankster did react to Elizabeth's appearance earlier and even fell from the sky. However, no one dared to say that he wasn't a devil and wouldn't hurt others anymore. Crassus and Julian watched from the side and didn't say anything either. "Jonas, please help me set up another array formation to trap him. Before we confirm that he won't turn into a devil again, we can't let him escape," Meg requested Jonas. "All right." Jonas nodded. Sealing Cthulhu might be a difficult task, but sealing a 10th-tier powerhouse who couldn't move was not difficult for Jonas. He took out the leftover materials from setting up the sealing array formation earlier and set up a simplified version of the array formation according to the method of the sealing array formation. The array formation lit up, and an inverted bowl-shaped sealing array formation appeared, sealing Rankster inside. Irina raised the magic caster staff in her hand and healed Rankster, stopping the blood from flowing out of a few of his terrible wounds. Thank you, thank you. Elizabeth bowed deeply to Meg and Irina, her face full of gratitude. Although her father was temporarily sealed, this was actually to protect him. She believed that her father would definitely regain his consciousness, but before that, he couldn't do anything to hurt the innocent. Otherwise, he would definitely be eliminated as a dangerous person. Meg nodded and turned to walk towards the command center. The war was already won, and he just received a text message from she. Arila's crisis had been resolved, but there was a problem in Lantis, so he had to let Dexter go back first. He also needed to gather the leaders of the various clans and hold a celebration. Although he wasn't good at such things, as the highest commander of the Allied forces, he had to say a few words for the sake of the brave soldiers. Alex, a legendary being. I think the Norland continent will remember him forever. Vicky couldn't help but click his tongue in wonder. Before the war started, she thought that she would play an important role in this war, and might even need to ask for resources from the First Fleet. Who would have thought they were just there for show? Furthermore, he was able to watch a war that had an astonishing amount of casualties. The charm of battle formations was fully displayed at this moment, and that mysterious man was the absolute protagonist of this war. He displayed his teamwork and individual heroism to the extreme, leaving her with an indelible memory. I've decided he will be the lead in the next opera. Vicky clenched her fists and said seriously, "The war has ended, but there's a problem in Lantis. I have to make a trip there now," she said as she steered the battleship to head south. The family of stars escaped? Vicky looked a little nervous. If that was the case, it would be terrible. No, our Ela city has disappeared forever. She shook her head with a calm expression. However, Lantis has sunk. That seems terrible too. Vicky stared. Lantis sinking meant two things. Lantis had sunk, and the sky of the underground city had collapsed. To be precise, there should be a hole above the underground city. A passageway connecting the underground city and the Norland continent had been opened up, and it could be an extremely huge hole. In the underground city, not everyone knew about the existence of the Norland continent. This secret only existed in a certain class. Vicky didn't dare to imagine what kind of impact it would have if the passageway between the two worlds was opened up. But if that's the case, wouldn't it be much easier to come to the Norland continent in the future? We don't have to take the risk of passing through the spatial rift like before. Vicky thought of another aspect of the impact. If that was the case, it didn't seem as bad as she thought. Your Majesty, Lantis is still falling. The suction force is too strong, and we can't break free from the whirlpool. Lantis was currently in a state of fear. They first felt the violent tremors from the bottom of the sea, and then witnessed the collapse of the sky pillar that had existed for countless years. Immediately after, the bottom of the sea seemed to have become a huge whirlpool and actually pulled the entire Lantis downwards. Even with the king's 10th tier power, he still couldn't break free from that terrifying suction force. The king's face was pale. That terrifying suction force was beyond his ability. That was the power of heaven and earth, and it surpassed the laws that he understood. After a period of darkness, the light reappeared. They saw clouds, 3 scorching suns. What was even scarier was that these things were actually below them. They had fallen from the bottom of the sea to the sky. The king and the Lantistians who were hiding near the royal palace were all stunned. They couldn't understand what was going on. The women and children couldn't help but cry. They started to suspect that they were already dead and were heading to heaven. A staff member walked quickly to Ferdinand, who was commanding the battle at the front line, and said in a trembling voice, "Lord Ferdinand, the sky has broken. A piece of the Norland continent is falling rapidly to the ground. Let the formation masters fix up the sky first, and let the First Fleet destroy the falling rocks." Ferdinand stood at the old site of our Ela city that was in a mess. He looked up at the sky and squinted his eyes slightly. Between the layers of clouds, a small black dot appeared, and one of the black dots was rapidly enlarging. But, Lord, the test report says that there are intelligent life forms on that piece of land. They're most likely the mere folk from Lantis, the staff member said. What? Ferdinand was slightly shocked. After a moment of silence, he quickly said, "Let the first fleet move out and approach that piece of land from below. Use the battleships to support the land and ensure that the land can land safely." Yes. The staff member left quickly. Soon, hundreds of battleships rose into the sky and flew towards that black dot in the sky. It's fine if the sky is falling, but what's the big deal about bringing down an entire race? Is the secret of the existence of the underground city finally unable to be kept? Ferdinand furrowed his brows, but he quickly ordered the formation masters to come and set up the formation. The miasma around Ar-Ela city had already dissipated, but they urgently needed a layer of fog that couldn't be dispersed to block the curious gazes of the visitors from the other continent. You're tuning into the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.